Somewhere far away, in the blue hour that comes just before the dark, a bell is knocking softly against the flank of a camel, and that small unhurried sound is where we will begin tonight, so let it be the last thing your mind has to hold. There is a long road running west across a wide and cooling country, a pale track worn into the earth by more feet than anyone could ever count, and along that road, in the deepening blue of the dusk, a caravan is walking. Picture it slowly, in no hurry at all, for there is nothing here to hurry toward. 120 camels, great shaggy two-humped beasts of the cold highlands, the kind they call Bactrian, walking nose to tail in one long unbroken line, each one's breath steaming a little in the evening air, each one placing its broad soft feet down onto the dust with a patience that has no beginning and no end, and the whole line of them stretches back along the road for the better part of a quarter of a mile, swaying gently, rocking gently, a slow brown river of animals moving west beneath the first faint stars. And on every 10th camel there hangs a brass bell, a single deep-throated bell that swings with the animals walking and knocks, now and then, soft and low, a note here and a note there, all down the length of the line, so that the whole quarter mile of the caravan moves along inside a kind of slow, scattered music, a loose and drowsy chiming that is never quick and never loud, that rises and fades and rises again in time with the rocking of the beasts, so that if you closed your eyes and only listened, you would hear the whole great line of them breathing and shuffling and softly ringing their way through the dusk. And walking at the head of it all, not riding but walking, on his own 2 feet is the caravan master, an unhurried man in a long coat and a felt hat, his head bowed a little, his eyes on the ground, reading the road the way you might read a familiar page, watching for the soft places and the stones, feeling the day's last light go out of the sky. And far ahead of him, small in the distance, there is a wall, and a gate in the wall, and above the gate a single lamp has just been lit. One small warm point of light kindled against the coming night. Because in these places the gates close at full dark, and the lamp is only saying, gently, here is the door, there is still time, come in when you come. There is no alarm anywhere in this. Nobody is afraid, nobody is hurrying. The bell knocks, the camels sway, the master reads the ground, and the little lamp burns above the far gate, and the blue goes slowly out of the air. And that is the whole of the world for now, and it is enough. So before we walk another step, let us set the day down. You have carried it far enough. Whatever this day asked of you, whatever you had to hold up and hold together and keep from falling, you can put all of it down now, the way the men at the end of a march lift the heavy packs from the camels and set them on the ground and hear the beasts sigh, the way you might swing a heavy basket down off your shoulder at the end of a long walk, and feel your whole body float up an inch, lighter, once the weight has gone. Set it down. It will be there in the morning if you truly need it, and most of it you will find you did not need at all. And let us breathe. 3 slow breaths, no more, just to loosen the ropes. Breathe in, gently, and let it go, slower on the way out. And again, drawing the cool evening air down deep, and letting it flow back out. And as it goes, let your jaw come unclenched. Let the teeth part a little. Let the whole lower face go soft. And one more, slow and easy, and this time as you breathe out, let your hands go loose. Let the fingers open, and fall the way a rider lets the rope drop from his hand. When the day's work is done, and the animal is home, no more gripping, no more holding on, just open hands, and an easy breath, and a body growing heavier by the moment against whatever holds you. Good, that is all you need to do tonight. From here you have only to listen, and even the listening can go loose and drifting as we walk, because this is a story made for exactly that, made to be walked into and fallen asleep inside of, and there is no wrong way to travel it. And I would like, before the dark is full, to ask you one small and easy thing. only if you care to. Only if you are still here and it pleases you. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? If you like, you might leave it below. Just the name of your town or your country. A word or two, like a small mark set down on a map. One more lantern lit along this road, so that as the nights go by there comes to be a whole long line of little lights strung out around the whole turning world, and the caravan has lamps to walk by all the way around the earth, one glowing at every distance. Each one saying only, here is someone resting, here is a friend on the road. You do not have to. The caravan walks just the same either way, but it is a warm thing to know the lights are there. Now let me tell you what kind of night this is going to be, because it is a little different from the nights we have walked before. On other nights in this quiet place, we stood still. We went once to a green rainforest and stayed among the Maya, in their warm world of corn and rain, and did not leave it. We went once to a river in the desert and stayed beside the Egyptians and their slow brown flood, and let 1,000 years pass without moving from the water's edge. Those were stories that stood in one place and let time flow past them like a river past a stone. But tonight, for the first time, we are going to move. Tonight we are going to walk the longest road that human beings have ever made, the road that ran clear across the roof of the world, some 4,000 miles of it, from the far eastern edge, where China meets the mountains, all the way to the shining city on the water at the western end, where Asia at last touches Europe. And we are going to walk it the only honest way there is, which is slowly, at the pace of a loaded camel, a little over 2 miles in an hour, one soft footfall after another, one oasis and one well and one walled garden at a time, the whole way across the world. And time we will fold as gently as we fold the distance, for this road was the work not of one lifetime, but of many hundreds of years, near 15 centuries of caravans, from the first far journey west under the old Han emperors more than 2,000 years ago, down to the very last caravans that ever crossed it, when at last the ships found their way around by sea and the great road fell quiet. And all of that we will gather into one continuous journey, one long walk west, as though it were all one endless evening, and I promise you, as always, that nothing on this road will startle you. There are great deserts ahead, but we will cross them as the caravans truly did, by night, in the cool, under a sky enormous with stars, walking in the dark from star to star while the sand gives back the day's warmth, so that even the harshest country comes to us soft and quiet. There are high passes ahead over the roof of the world, but we will take them slowly, one switchback at a time, resting often. And every city we come to will be an arrival and not an alarm, a gate and a lamp at the end of a long day's walking, a place to be let in and fed and laid down to rest, never a cliff edge, never a place where you must stay awake to see what happens next, because on this road nothing happens next in the way that keeps you awake. The whole purpose of it is that you should drift off somewhere along the way, out between the wells, and that is not missing anything, that is doing it exactly right, for the caravan will walk on without you and wait for you at the next well, patient as the camels, and it will all still be here whenever you come back. So there is nothing to reach for and nothing to stay up for. There is only the long road west and the slow bells and the walking. Let us walk then to the eastern end of it, to the place where the whole road begins, for a road must begin somewhere. And this one begins at a gate in the wall of the greatest city in the world. Its name is Chang'an, and the name means something as gentle as this whole night, for it means perpetual peace, lasting peace, the peace that does not end, and in the age we speak of it was quite simply the largest city anywhere on earth, a city of near 1 million souls, more people gathered inside one wall than in any other place under the sun. Come toward it now in the dusk, as our caravan is coming, and see it rise up out of the plain, laid out not in a tangle but with a great and calming order, square and true, wrapped all around by a wall of pounded earth, near 5 miles along each side, so broad on top you could walk along it, and set into that wall at measured spaces the great gates, each crowned with a painted tower of dark timber and upcurved tile, red and green in the last of the light. And inside, if you could rise above it like a bird, you would see the most orderly city imaginable, laid on a grid as neat as a game board, wide straight avenues running north and south and east and west and crossing at clean right angles. The greatest of them wide enough for 10 carts side by side, a river of beaten earth running arrow straight between the low-tiled roofs, and the grid divided the whole city into more than 100 blocks. 108 of them. Each a walled ward with its own gates, a little walled town inside the great walled city, so that the whole of Chang'an was a pattern of squares within a square, wall within wall. And now the day is ending, and here is the thing I most want you to see. For as the sun sinks, the great drums begin. High in the drum towers the watchmen take up their beaters, and out over the roofs rolls a deep, slow, booming drum answering drum, the signal that the day is done, and at that sound, all across Chang'an, the wards begin to close. Ward by ward, the gates of each little walled block are swung shut and barred for the night, and the great avenues, that all day were rivers of people and carts and dust, empty themselves out block by block, the crowds draining away through the closing gates until the wide streets lie bare and silver and still under the rising moon, mile upon mile of empty avenue with not a soul upon it. While behind the walls of the 108 wards 1,000,000 people settle in their lamplit courtyards for the night. Think of that softly as the drums roll and fade, a whole enormous city folding itself up at dusk like a tide going out, the crowds withdrawing from the great streets and gathering into 108 quiet pools of lamplight, so that a person lying down to sleep in Chang'an that night lay down safe inside a house, inside a courtyard, inside a ward behind its barred gate, inside the great 5-mile wall of the city itself, safe inside safe inside safe, wrapped round and round in walls and quiet, while the silver avenues lay empty under the moon. There are few more restful things to hold in the mind than a great city putting itself to bed one ward at a time, the streets going quiet, all the lamps coming on behind the walls. But there was one place near the western edge we must see before our own gate swings shut, one ward unlike the rest, just inside the western wall, hard by the western gate through which all the roads of the far west came pouring in, and it was called the Western Market, the place where the whole world came to China. All day, until the drums, this was the loudest and strangest and most wonderful corner of the city, a great open ground of stalls and shops and warehouses, where the goods and peoples of half the earth met and traded. And if you walked through it, you would hear, in a few steps, more languages than you knew existed. Here were Persian merchants from the far west, dealers in gems and pearls, weighing precious stones on little bronze balances. Here were the Sogdians, that great trading people from the walled oasis cities of the west, from Samarkand and its green valleys, pouring out cups of their famous grape wine. Here were traders from India, their bales fragrant with black pepper and sweet sandalwood. Here were Turks and Tibetans, and men from 100 lands between, in 100 kinds of dress, calling their wares in the tongues of places most of the crowd would never see, so that the whole market was a single warm roar made of half the languages of the earth, threaded all through if you listened, with a sound we already know, the slow deep chiming of bells, the bells of yet another caravan just now coming in through the western gate off the long road, weary and dusty and swaying, its camels smelling the end of their journey. And as the drums roll now and the light fails, and even this great market begins to close, its merchants covering their stalls and counting their day's take of silk and silver, we come at last to the thing all of it turned upon, the one quiet secret that held the whole 4,000-mile road together. For over in one corner, by lamplight, a few men are still at work packing bales for the road west, folding lengths of cloth and wrapping them in coarse outer wrapping, and stitching them shut with a big curved needle and stout thread, sewing each bale closed for its long journey to the far side of the world. and the cloth they fold away so carefully, the cloth that will ride the whole length of the road on the backs of the swaying camels, the cloth so light and so precious that men would pay for it. At the far western end, its own weight in gold is silk. That single shimmering thread was the secret that held the whole enormous road upright. One fine, glimmering strand running unbroken all the way from these lamplit stalls to the marble cities of the distant west. And it began with something so small and so soft you would hardly believe a road 4,000 miles long could hang upon it. And the secret sewn up inside those bales was so soft and so unlikely that you could cup the whole of it in one hand and never guess that kingdoms grumbled over it, that men had crossed deserts for it. So let me tell it now, unhurried, for it is worth every slow minute, and it begins not with a king and not with a caravan, but with a moth. A small, pale, soft-furred moth, no larger than the top joint of your thumb, creamy white, feathered along her antennae, and here is the first tender thing to know about her, that she can hardly fly at all. Thousands of years of living close to human hands have made her gentle and clumsy and helpless, so that she does not dart and wheel the way a wild moth does. She only trembles her stubby wings a little and rests, content to stay. And the whole of her short life comes down to one soft task, to lay her eggs, hundreds of them, each no bigger than a pinhead. A little scatter of pale specks laid on a sheet of paper or cloth, and then her one work done she quietly ends, and the eggs are gathered and kept warm through the cold months, sometimes carried against the warmth of a person's own body, until spring comes and the mulberry trees put out their first tender leaves, and then, and only then, are the eggs allowed to wake. And when they wake, out of each tiny egg comes a tiny dark caterpillar, so small you could lose 100 in a fold of your sleeve, hungry from the first moment, and from that moment there is only one thing these creatures will eat, the leaf of the white mulberry tree, chopped fine when they are little, laid on their trays in soft green drifts, and they eat, and they eat, and do almost nothing but eat, day and night, growing and growing, shedding their skins 4 times over, until from specks smaller than rice they swell into plump pale caterpillars as long and thick as your finger, smooth and soft and the colour of cream. And the silk farmers, the families who had kept this soft art for 100 generations, tended them like the most delicate of children, keeping the room warm and free of draughts and loud noise and strong smells, laying fresh mulberry leaves over them many times a day and through the night, so that at the height of their feeding, when a whole room of these creatures is eating at once, there rises a sound, and it is the sweetest detail in the whole gentle story. A soft, steady, whispering patter. The sound of thousands of tiny mouths nibbling 10,000 leaves all together. A low continuous rustle that fills the warm dark room and sounds, for all the world, exactly like soft rain falling on leaves outside a window. And the silk farmers slept beside that sound, laying their mats in the feeding rooms and sleeping the whole season through with that gentle rain that was not rain whispering all around them in the dark. And I want you to hear it now, and let it be your own soft rain tonight, that endless tender patter of small mouths on green leaves. Rest on that a while. Then, when the caterpillar has eaten its fill and grown as large as it will ever grow, a restlessness comes over it, and it lifts its soft head and casts about, and the farmers give it what it is looking for, a little bundle of straw or fine twigs set up like a small thicket above the tray, and the creature climbs up into it and begins the wondrous thing this whole story turns upon. From 2 tiny openings near its mouth it begins to spin, giving out a single fine thread, thinner than a hair, wet and gleaming as it comes, and it swings its head slowly, patiently, in a small figure 8, over and over, laying that thread around and around itself, and it does not stop, and it does not break the thread, and it does not tire, but goes on turning its head in that same slow, endless motion for 3 whole days and nights, wrapping itself around and around in a soft, glowing cloud of thread that hardens as it dries, until it has hidden itself entirely inside a smooth little egg-shaped case about the size of your thumbnail, pale gold or white, light as a breath. And that little case is the cocoon. And here is the thing to marvel at gently as you drift, that the single thread the creature spun, that one unbroken filament wound around for 3 days without once snapping, if you could draw it out straight, would run on for the better part of half a mile. One continuous shining strand, finer than a hair, all spun patiently out of one small creature no bigger than your finger. Half a mile of gleaming thread from one soft life wound into a case the size of a thumbnail. And now the people come gently and take the cocoons, and this is the part that is a little bittersweet, so I will pass it softly, that most of the cocoons cannot be allowed to finish, because if the creature became its moth and pushed its way out, it would break the long thread. And so the cocoons are warmed to keep the thread whole, and only some are kept back to become the moths that lay next year's eggs, and so the soft round turns again. But the cocoons themselves are the treasure. They are gathered by the basketful and dropped into basins of warm water, and the warm water softens the gum that holds the thread together. And then a woman sits by the basin with a little brush and stirs the water. And the loose ends of the fine threads catch and lift away, and she gathers several of these gossamer ends together, because a single filament is far too fine to be any use alone, and she begins so gently to draw them up out of the water and wind them off, unspooling that half-mile of thread out of each cocoon, several at a time twisting together into a single stronger strand as they come, and this is called reeling the silk, slow and quiet and patient work, done by warm water and careful fingers. And once she has her reeled silk, those long fine strands are twisted and doubled into threads strong enough to weave, and the thread is dyed, and set upon the loom and woven, and out of it comes the cloth. And oh, the cloth! There has never been anything quite like it. It is smooth beyond smoothness, cool and slippery to the touch as water running over your hand, and it hangs and flows and pours when you lift it, catching the light and shifting it, so that a bolt of fine silk seems almost to be liquid, a length of pale river you could fold into a chest. It is warm to wrap around you in the winter, and yet cool against your skin in the summer, both at once, as though it knew what you needed. It is strong, far stronger than it has any right to be, so that a thread of it will hold where a thicker thread of wool would snap. It drinks up dye like nothing else, taking the deep reds and the imperial yellows and the blues and greens so richly that a room hung with dyed silk glows like the sky at evening. And it is so impossibly light that a whole robe of it weighs almost nothing, folds down to fit in your 2 hands, so that they used to say you could forget you were wearing it, as though you had dressed yourself in coloured air. That is silk. That is the soft shining thing the small pale moth and the rain-sound caterpillars and the patient women at the warm basins made, and that is what lay sewn up inside the bales in the great market, waiting to travel west. And travel west it did, all the way at last to Rome, the great city on its distant sea, where the lords and ladies had never seen the moth or the mulberry, and did not care to, and only knew that this cloth like woven water had come out of the unimaginable East, and they craved it, they could not have enough of it. And because it had come so far, hand to hand across half the earth, it was worth by the time it reached them its own weight in gold, quite literally, a length of silk balanced on one pan of the scale against gold coins heaped on the other until the two came even, weight for weight. And there were stern old senators in Rome who grumbled that all the treasure of the empire was draining away eastward, poured out for nothing but soft cloth to please the vain. And yet for all their grumbling the silk kept flowing west, and the gold kept flowing east, because some longings are stronger than any senator's speech. And how did it stay so precious for so long? Because of the secret. For here is the last and quietest wonder of it, that for close to 2,000 years the people at the eastern end kept the making of silk entirely to themselves, so that all the world could buy the cloth but no one else knew how it was made. And they guarded that secret with the one hard law I must name softly in the middle of this gentle night, that to carry the eggs of the moth or the seeds of the mulberry out past the western passes was forbidden on pain of death, and I name it not to trouble you, but because it is only the measure of the wonder. The price the wonder was held at, that a scatter of pinhead eggs was guarded like the crown of an empire. And it worked. For hundreds of years it worked. And so all the peoples beyond the mountains who wore the cloth and could not make it were left to guess, and they guessed wonderfully wrong. Some believed silk grew on trees, a soft white down that ripened on the branches in the far eastern forests and was combed off and spun. Others said it was combed like fine threads out of a certain river in the land of the dawn. Not one of them imagined the small pale moth, the trays of soft rain, the patient women at the basins. Let all of that settle over you softly now. The moth, the rain sound, the half-mile thread, the watercloth, the gold, the guarded secret, and let it carry you a little further down. Now a road does not simply appear because there is something worth carrying along it. Someone must go first, must walk the untried distance over the passes and across the wastes into lands where no one who speaks your language has ever been, and come back and say, "It can be done. And the way is this way." And so before we walk the road ourselves, we must sit a little while with the man who, more than any other, first walked it into being. And the restful thing about him is that he made the greatest road on earth, not by conquering anything and not by building anything, but simply, patiently, by walking. His name was Zhang Qian, and he lived more than 2,000 years past. In the days of the Han emperors, and the emperor of that time, troubled by fierce nomad horsemen on his northern borders, had heard a rumour of another people far to the west, who might be persuaded to become his allies, and he wanted to send someone to find them and carry his message to a kingdom that was little more than a name on the wind. It was an errand from which a man might never return, and out of the court there stepped forward this one man, Zhang Qian, who volunteered, and he was given the emperor's authority to carry a tall staff topped with a plume of yak-tail hair, the sign that he travelled as the voice of the emperor himself, and with about 100 companions he rode out into the vast unknown. And almost at once things went wrong in the gentlest way that going wrong can go, for he had to pass through the lands of those very horsemen, and they caught him, the whole party, and here is the tender surprise, that they did not harm him, they simply kept him. Their chieftain was curious about this envoy from the east and unwilling to let him go on, and so he held Zhang Qian among his people, gave him a tent, let him move about, and in time even gave him a wife from among the steppe people, and Zhang Qian lived there, a watched and honoured guest, not free to leave, not for a year, not for 2, but for 10 long years, learning the horseman's tongue, raising a family, growing older. And through all 10 of those years he kept one thing faithfully, and it is the detail I love most, that he kept the emperor's staff, kept it whole and by him even as the plume surely wore thin, as his own quiet way of saying to himself every day that this long comfortable life among the tents was not the end of his errand, but only a very long pause in the middle of it. And then, at last, after 10 years, when the watch upon him had loosened, Zhang Qian slipped quietly away, and here is the measure of the man, that a person freed after 10 years might well have turned for home, but he did not turn for home. He turned west, onward to finish the errand, still carrying the staff, over the high passes and down the other side, and came into a green valley called Fergana, a land of horses, where he saw a wonder that would set the whole East dreaming tall, long-legged horses finer by far than any horse the East had known, of which it was whispered that when they galloped hard they sweated red as though with blood. And he went on, further west, down into a settled land of walled towns and green gardens and busy markets. And there, in one of those far western marketplaces, so far from home that home was scarcely a memory, he saw something that stopped him where he stood. He saw, for sale in the stalls, goods from China, cloth and cane and wares he knew, made in his own distant homeland, and they had not come by the road he had come. They had come, the merchants told him, by some other way, up through India, along paths he had never heard named, and in that moment Zhang Qian understood something enormous and quiet, that the world was already talking to itself, that goods and word were already trickling from kingdom to kingdom across unimaginable distances, that the earth was far vaster and more connected than anyone in his court had dreamed. And carrying that knowledge, worth more than any treaty, he turned at last for home, and the road home was as hard and slow as the road out, and he was caught again for a time, and freed again, and when he finally came riding back, he had been gone 13 years, and of the 100 men who set out with him, only one still returned at his side, along with his step-born wife. And he was still carrying the tattered staff. He had failed at the small errand entirely. But he had brought back something far greater, a true and careful account of everything he had seen, the first clear word the Chinese court had ever had of the whole wide Western world, and that report changed everything. For now China knew that the West was there. Real, reachable, full of people who would trade, and so where Jiang Qian had walked, others began to go. Envoys and soldiers, and then, in time, merchants and their camels. And the faint tracks he had traced were walked again and again, until they became a path. And the path became a road, and the road became, over the slow centuries, the greatest and longest road there has ever been upon the earth. All of it, because one patient man, held 10 years in a tent and never once turned aside, kept walking. Let that rest with you gently. And now, at last, in the grey quiet hour before the dawn, let us come back to the caravan we have been keeping company with, and finally meet, face to face, the man whose soft bells we followed at the beginning of all this. In a wide caravan yard just inside the western gate, in the still cold hour when the sky has only begun to pale and the lamps still burn gold, a man moves among the couched and grumbling camels, unhurried, sure of every step, and his name is Nanai Vandak, and he is the master of this caravan, and he is a Sogdian, and the Sogdians are the quiet heroes of this whole road, the people who more than any other kept it living for 1,000 years, from a cluster of green valleys far out along the middle of the road, gathered around bright cities whose names ring like little bells, the greatest of them Samarkand, and they were merchants, travellers, the middlemen of half the world, who spoke many tongues and kept their honest accounts, and carried goods and letters and news from one end of the road to the other, trusted everywhere, at home everywhere. And they loved trade so tenderly that they had a custom at the birth of a son, to touch a little honey to the newborn's lips, so all his life his words would be sweet and persuasive, and place a little sticky gum upon his tiny palms, so all his life money would stick to them and not slip away. One of the tenderest small pictures in this whole story. A mother and father bending over their baby with honey and gum. And Nanai Vandak was such a man, and now in the last dark before the dawn he moves among his 120 kneeling camels. And there is hardly anything more restful than watching a man do skilled work he has done 10,000 times, and loves and knows to the bone. So come and stand with him, and watch his hands go on ahead of his thoughts, sure and unhurried, in the dark. He begins as he always begins, with the loads, for a caravan is really only a way of carrying loads gently across the enormous middle of the world, and so he goes to each pair of bales and takes each knot in his fingers, one at a time, and tests it, a small firm pull. And if a knot is not right, he does not scold anyone, and does not sigh. He simply loosens it and ties it again, properly, and moves his hand to the next. And when the knots are right, he leans his own weight against each bale, feeling how it sits. For a load must be truly balanced, the weight split exactly even between the two sides, and split exactly, not near enough. For he knows the way he knows his own name, that a load hung even a little off in the cool morning will, by the heat of evening, have rubbed at the one spot it leans upon, until there is a sore. And a sore becomes a raw wound, and a lame camel 3 weeks out into the corridor is a small quiet ruin that no journey's profit can survive. And so he feels the balance with his whole body, and shifts it where it is off, a folded cloth tucked under here, a strap drawn up there, until it sits true, for the little care taken now in the dark is the whole difference, weeks from here, between a beast that walks in easy and a beast that suffers. Then he comes to the water, and he goes to the great swollen skins of goat skin and oxhide, and lifts each one, and swings it up beside his ear and listens. For a skin truly full makes almost no sound, riding heavy and silent, while a skin drunk down or begun to seep in the night sloshes gives a little hollow slap, and the ones that talk he sets aside to be topped up at the well. So not one animal walks out carrying less water than it should. And then he comes to the camels themselves, and here his hands go tender, running his open palm down the long forelegs, feeling for any heat or swelling or hidden, hurt the camel in its patience, would never think to complain of, and lifting each wide soft foot in turn, the great two-toed foot with its broad leathery pad that lets these creatures walk where a horse would flounder, reading each animal through his hands. And then comes the ordering of the line, a quiet art of its own, for at the very head he sets the old cow camel, the great pale patient female who has walked this road to Samarkand and back 12 times. So nothing left in all these miles can surprise her, she startles at nothing, and better still she can smell true water from 2 days off, and so she goes first, and the whole caravan trusts itself to her nose and her calm. Behind her he sets the other seasoned older beasts, and only then, tied well down the middle of the line, does he put the young green ones on their first great journey, and he ties them there on purpose, hemmed before and behind by their patient elders, because out there a young camel can only do what the whole line is doing, walk when it walks and stop when it stops, so the line itself, day by day, teaches them gently, without a single harsh word, until by the far end of the road they too are steady, and to each animal hangs a bell, and here is the finest of his knowings, that he knows every single bell by its own voice, this one a little deeper, that one a little cracked, so that riding at the head of the line in the dark he can hear, without ever turning around, the whole line of bells telling him that all is well, that every beast is walking. None stopped, none strayed, and if one voice should fall silent or begin to sound wrong he would know it at once, from the front, and turn back to see. Let that settle into you as you drift, the man who can hear his whole caravan through its bells. And there is one thing more he does before the light comes, the softest of all, for he sits a moment by the fire and writes a letter home to Samarkand, to his family in the Green Valley, and it says nothing grand, only that he is well, that the camels are sound and the loads are good, that he is setting out this morning, that he thinks of them, that he will write again from Dunhuang, and he folds it and gives it, with a coin, to a rider bound east on the Imperial Post Road, to be carried on stage to stage all the long way back toward home, and this is one of the quiet wonders of the road, that this greatest of all roads is stitched together and held whole. In the end, by nothing so much as people writing home, by letters passing east while the caravans pass west, so that the road is not only a road of silk and jade, but a road of longing and of news, along which people are forever saying to one another across the vast distances, "I am well, I am thinking of you, I will come home, rest a while in that." And now, as he seals the letter, the dark begins to thin, and from the great drum towers there comes the slow booming of the dawn drums, deep and enormous, rolling out across the sleeping capital, and ward by ward the drums wake the greatest city on earth, the 108 walled wards opened now one after another, so the whole city comes awake in a slow spreading wave of sound. And the great western gate is unbarred and hauled groaning open onto the road that runs away west toward the setting stars. And Nanai Vandak gives the low call, and all down the line the camels come up off the ground the way camels do, back legs first so the whole animal pitches forward and then the front, up and up, 120 of them rising together with a vast soft chorus of groaning. For a camel will always tell you it would rather have slept, and then they are up and standing, tall and swaying and laden. The bells all speaking at once, and the line draws itself out toward the open gate, and on their backs rides the wealth of the east going west, silk above everything, and bronze mirrors polished to a soft moon-bright shine. and boxes of lacquerware gleaming darkly, red upon black. And here, by the gate, under the willow trees along the water, the friends have come to see the travellers off, and they do the thing Chang'an has always done at partings. They break from the willows a green twig and press it into the traveller's hand, a tender custom. A way of saying without quite saying it, stay if you can, and if you cannot stay, then come back to us, come back green and living as this twig, and the travellers tuck the willow twigs into the ropes of their saddles. A little green blessing riding west, and there are quiet words and hands held a moment and then let go, and the line moves on. And the low sun, just lifting behind them, throws the whole caravan's shadow out long and thin ahead of it, pointing like an arrow exactly the way they are going, west. And they follow their own long shadow out through the gate and away, and behind them the great walls and drum towers and million people sink down smaller and hazier with every mile until the mightiest city on earth is only a low grey smudge on the eastern horizon. And then, not even that, and there is nothing now but the road running on ahead, and the morning, and the swaying of the beasts, and the mingled voices of the bells, and the day settles into what all the days will now become, a matter of direction, and rhythm, and bells. And the road carries them into the shape of the land that will hold them for 1,000 miles, a marvellous shape. For west of the capital the way runs into a long natural hallway laid down by the earth itself, a corridor near 1,000 miles from end to end, narrow and straight and clear, and it has walls, this hallway, tall walls on either hand. On the left, to the south, rise the great mountains, high and blue and serene, keeping their snow along the tops even in the warm months, a long white crest hung up in the sky, and that snow is the secret kindness of the whole corridor, for it melts a little and comes down onto the plain, and everywhere it comes down there is water, springs and wells and green places, so that all along the foot of the mountains runs a thin ribbon of life, a green thread of grass and reeds and tall poplars and little watered fields, and it is along this green thread that the road runs and the wells are dug and the towns have grown. And on the right hand, to the north, lies the other wall, not stone but emptiness, the great desert, the Gobi, stretching away flat and grey and dry beyond counting, close enough to see and yet never entered, just as the snowy mountains are never climbed, for the road keeps to the green ribbon between them, and down that thread the caravan walks. Rest there a while, the white mountains on one side, and the grey desert on the other, and the green watered road threading gently between them. And the days take on their steady measure, for a caravan like this does not race, it goes about 20 miles in a day and never more, from one well to the next, 20 miles and then rest. And there is a deep calm in that pace, in knowing the road will not be hurried, that it asks only the same 20 patient miles each day, and gives in return the evening's water and rest, over and over, all the way across. And they are never truly alone, for all along the corridor stands a chain of towers, low square towers of packed earth, the colour of a bread crust, each set within sight of the next, a long dotted line running up the corridor like the stitches of a seam sewn up the middle of the land. And these are the beacon towers, the way the Empire talks to itself across the great distances, faster than any horse. For the soldiers send word from tower to tower with fire by night and smoke by day, so the caravan walks all day beneath this quiet high conversation, passing news above their heads. And the men in the towers are not only soldiers but farmers too, and they come out to the passing caravan in the friendliest way, walking down with wooden buckets to trade a little, to give water, and above all to trade news, for news is a kind of cargo too, and they tell what they know, that the wells 2 stages on are sweet and full this year, that a sandstorm buried the marker cairn at such a place, so mind you do not miss the turning. And it is these tower soldiers who check the little permit slips, small flat slips of wood, with your name and business written in ink, and the soldier reads them, and looks along the line, and, satisfied, stamps them, and the stamp makes a small dull knock. the soft knuckle on a door sound of the wooden seal pressing down, the Empire itself, gently, saying, "You may pass, go on." And so an afternoon comes, an ordinary workmanlike afternoon, when a dry wind gets up along the corridor, and Nanai Vandak feels it, and knows what it does, that such a wind hour by hour works at the loads and loosens the knots. And so without being asked he turns and walks back down the whole length of his line, laying his hand on each load, snugging what the wind has loosened, and as he goes he sees that one of the young camels is favouring a foot, and he stops and kneels in the dust and lifts the great soft foot into his lap and turns back the cushion of the pad and finds it, a small crack begun in the leathery sole. Nothing yet, nothing that need ever become anything if seen now, and he works a little mutton fat into it with his thumb's slow soft circles. And the young camel stands quiet and lowers its head and half closes its great long-lashed eyes, soothed, drowsy, for all the world like a child being told a bedtime story and drifting off in the middle of it. And when the foot is dressed, he sets it gently down and rises and goes on. Hold that a moment, the man kneeling in the afternoon light with the camel's foot in his lap, and the great creature drowsing above him with its lashes lowered. And then the light goes long and gold, and the day's 20 miles are walked, and they come to the night's stopping place beneath one of the old towers of packed earth that has guarded the road since the days of the Khan, and they make camp in its lee. The camels are couched down in a great ring, the people and fire and goods gathered safe in the middle, and the bales are stacked along the windward side into a low wall against the night wind, so the loads that travelled all day now stand guard all night, and within the ring a fire of dried camel dung is lit, burning slow and low and almost without smoke, a soft red heart of warmth in the middle of the great darkness, and the tea is made, and the men sit close with their hands around their bowls, quiet now, tired in the good way. And up in the old tower a single lamp is lit in the little window, a point of warm gold hung up in the dark, for the tower is still watched, and there is a soldier awake up there through the night, keeping the road, awake much as you are awake now, in the last of the day, keeping a gentle watch over the dark. And the last thing before the fire sinks is that Nanai Vandak rises once more, tired as he is, and walks slowly around the whole ring of resting camels, and lays his hand for a moment on each one, on each rope, on each shoulder, feeling that each beast is settled and easy and down for the night. And the bells hang almost silent now, only stirring the softest note here and there as an animal shifts and sighs and sleeps. And above them the tower lamp burns steady and gold, and the fire glows low, and the mountains keep their pale snow up in the starlight to the south, and the great dark desert lies quiet to the north, and the green ribbon of the road runs on ahead, west, into the night. For some days on down that ribbon waits the great oasis Dunhuang, but there is no need to reach it tonight, no need to reach anything tonight. So let the fire sink, and let the tower lamp keep its watch, and let the master finish his round of the sleeping animals with his quiet hand on every rope, and drift and rest, for the road will still be here, running gently west between the mountains and the sand, when you come back to it. And so the green ribbon carries the caravan on, day after quiet day, the snow-topped mountains keeping their long blue line to the left, and the dry breath of the waste to the right, the bells finding their braided rhythm each dawn and letting it go each dusk, until one long afternoon, with the light gone gold and low, the road lifts the caravan over a last low rise of gravel, and there below, laid out in the wide bend of a small green river, is Dunhuang. The name means something like blazing beacon, a bright fire on the edge of the dark, and that is nearly what it looks like from here, for after so many days of pale stone the eye comes over the rise and drinks. Thousands upon thousands of tall poplars stand along the water, slim and silver green, and because there are so many, and the wind moves through them all at once, they make a sound almost exactly like soft rain, a long steady whispering hush with no beginning and no end, and after the great dry silence of the corridor that sound alone is enough to make the shoulders drop and the breath go slow. Below the poplars the whole oasis is threaded with water, narrow channels of clear cold snow melt led by the patient hands of many generations through the melon fields and apricot orchards. And the smell of the place comes up all at once, the dry warm smell of the desert on your clothes mixed now with the cool green smell of water and wet earth, and under it, homely, the smell of bread baking. So that hunger and ease and safety all arrive together before you reach the gate. This is Dunhuang, the great oasis where all the desert's roads are born. Behind you lies the 1,000-mile corridor and the empire, ahead lies the true desert, and every road that crosses it begins here. So it is a great gathering knot, the first true resting place. And as the caravan comes in, you see that Nanai Vandak is not the only one drawn here, for in the courtyards camels are kneeling in their dozens and hundreds, from every direction, and among them men in every kind of dress, traders from the west with their bright wools, monks in dun robes, soldiers, drivers, merchants of jade and horses and medicine. Nanai Vandak brings his 120 camels in, and one by one they fold their long legs and settle groaning to the ground, glad of it. And here is the thing to feel softly as the packs come down. There is no hurry now. The caravan will rest here for days. Here a caravan lingers, and lets the animals mend, and lets the men sleep whole nights through, and lays in what it needs for the harder road beyond. So you may set your own load down too, and let it stay down. There is nowhere you need to be tomorrow. Over the days that follow the caravan simply lives in the green, the heavy bales carried into the cool dark of the warehouses and stacked safe behind stout doors, the camels turned loose to eat and drink and grow fat and glossy, and the people of Dunhuang bring them the great pale melons of the oasis, split open and cooled in the running channels until the flesh is cold and sweet. So that day by day you can see the road fall off them, the ribs filling in, the humps standing firm again, until they are strong and ready for what waits past the last field. And while the bale sits safe there is time to go and look at wonders, and Dunhuang keeps 2 of them on its edges, and we drift out with the master in the soft ends of the days to see them. The first lies an hour's ride south, and you hear nothing of it until you come around the last of the fields, and there it is rising out of the flat land, a whole range of dunes, mountains of pure sand, gold and rose and deep amber in the low sun, some 300 feet high and more, and the thing that stops the breath is how clean they are, for the wind has laid the crest of each great dune into a single knife-fine ridge, as clean as the fold in a sheet, so the whole range stands there like something drawn rather than grown, the light side glowing warm and the shadowed side falling away blue. And then, as you sit your camel at the foot of them in the stillness, the sand begins to sing. This is the true marvel, the reason the people here name this the mountain of singing sand. For when the wind slides down the face of a dune, or the warmed sand at the top loosens and pours down under its own weight, the whole hill gives voice, beginning as a low hum you feel in your chest before you hear it, and swelling and deepening into a long rolling booming like a great drum buried under. The earth and struck slowly, a sound so vast and smooth and strangely gentle that it seems impossible it is only sand, only millions of grains sliding over one another and sighing all together, one single long note held in the desert air. It does not alarm the animals or the men. It is a deep, soft, enormous, soothing sound, the desert humming its one long note to itself in the evening. And you may let it hum you down towards sleep. Folded in among these very dunes, cupped down where you would swear no water could survive, lies the second wonder, the tenderest thing in all this country. Ride down into a hollow between the singing hills, and there, held in the sand on every side, lies a small lake shaped like the new moon, a long clean curve of clear water perhaps 100 paces from tip to tip, fed by a spring that has never failed, ringed with green reeds and a few patient trees that lean over their own reflection. And everyone asks how it can be there at all, how the sand that swallows whole cities has not simply filled it in a single windy season, and above all, how it has not done so in the 2,000 years people have loved it. And the answer is a quiet grace written into the shape of the land, for the dunes stand around the crescent, so that the winds, when they come, do not pour the sand down into the hollow, but curl and lift and carry it up and over the top, so the sand is forever being drawn out of the basin rather than driven in. And the little moon of water lies safe at the bottom of all that moving sand, century after century, kept. There is a third wonder, and for this the master rides the other way, to the southeast, where a low cliff of soft stone runs along a dry valley, and its story begins with one tired man at the end of a long day. Many centuries before Nanai Vandak, in a year we would count as 366, a wandering monk named Lazun came along this valley toward evening, footsore, at the hour when the sun was low and level in the west, and he lifted his eyes to the cliff, and the cliff, he said, blazed. It caught fire with golden light, and in the light he saw 1,000 Buddhas, 1,000 shining figures of gold glowing along the face of the rock. Whether that was a true vision granted to a weary holy man, or only the low sun striking a vein of mineral that flared gold in that one level moment, is not a question this road troubles itself with. For either way the tired monk set down his bundle, and stayed, and took up a chisel, and cut a single small cave into the soft stone, a plain hollow just big enough for one man to sit and meditate. One cave, cut by one man passing at sunset. And that turned out to be a seed, for another monk came after and cut another beside it, and then the merchants began to come. For a merchant who must cross the great desert is very often a praying man, about to trust his life and whole fortune to the sand and the wind, and such a man likes to leave an offering and ask a safe crossing, and likes still more, if he comes through alive, to come back and give thanks. And so grateful merchant after grateful merchant over the centuries paid for caves to be cut and painted, until the whole cliff filled with them, close to 500 in the end, honeycombed one above and beside another. And inside, out of the desert glare, in the cool dry dark, generation after generation of painters worked by the small light of oil lamps, grinding their colours from stone. The deep glowing blue made from lapis lazuli carried 1,000 miles and more from mountains in Afghanistan, the greens from malachite, the reds from ochre dug from the desert, and with these they painted paradise, flying spirits trailing long ribbons of cloud, great golden Buddhas seated calm and still, gardens and pools and rows of musicians playing in the paradises of the sky, so that a man could step in out of the burning emptiness and lift his lamp and find the whole wall alive with peace and gentle golden figures floating in a painted heaven, and could kneel there and be quiet and be unafraid. And here is the through line to hold as you drift. The faith itself had come this way as cargo. The teaching of the Buddha had not sprung up here in the sand. It had been born far off in India and travelled to this cliff exactly the way the silk and the glass travelled, carried east over the high passes in the saddlebags of merchants and the memories of monks, at the same patient 20 miles a day as every other precious thing. So that when you watch these caravans, you are watching more than goods move, you are watching an idea walk, slowly, oasis by oasis, from one end of the earth toward the other. There is one more thing about these caves, and I lay it down very softly, the way you set a stone by the path to pick up much later. Somewhere among all those painted caves the monks kept a small side chamber, and there over the years they stacked their writings, the sacred sutras roll upon roll, but not only those, for into that little room went also the plain paper life of the whole oasis, contracts and letters, calendars, a child's clumsy school exercises, receipts for grain and cloth and loans, all rising slowly toward the painted ceiling. And one day, for reasons no one now fully knows, that room would be sealed, its doorway bricked up and plastered smooth and painted over so the wall ran on unbroken, and no eye could tell a room had ever been there. And it would be forgotten, wholly forgotten, for a very long time, and all the while behind the plaster. In the perfect dryness of the desert air, everything inside would simply wait, unrotting, unfading, kept. Remember that sealed room, if you can, and if you cannot, it does not matter, for some stories are covered over on purpose and left in the dark, and they keep and come up again in their own good time, and this one will. Now the days of rest draw toward their end, and the road comes to its one great decision. West of here lies the desert everyone speaks of low, and the travellers have a hard flat saying, that you go into it and you do not come out. No caravan crosses its heart, a sea of sand where there is no water and no road and no mercy. And so the road, coming up against that terrible dry heart, does what water does when it meets a stone. It divides and goes around, splitting into a northern road along the desert's top and a southern along its bottom. And each is not one road, but a chain, a long strung line of oases, each green stepping stone passing the caravan along to the next, like a hand passing a lamp down a dark hall, all the way around to where the two roads meet again far on the other side. Nani Vandak chooses the southern road, and he chooses it because of Jade, because the southern road runs to Khotan, where the green stone comes from, and a Sogdian who knows his business points his camels where the jade is. And the leaving of Dunhuang comes at the soft violet end of a day, for now the road takes on the desert's own rhythm, to walk in the cool of the dark and lie up through the furnace of the day, and so the caravan files out westward, not into morning, but into dusk, toward the last door of China, the final gate of the whole empire, which stands out here past the last fields, and which is called the Jade Gate, for the green stone has flowed east through it so long that the gate simply took the name of the stone. They pass it in the last of the light, and there is not much to it, only a squat, strong tower of packed earth standing alone with the desert beginning beyond it, and the soldiers of the last garrison come out with lamps raised against the night. And the little inked permit is read, and the last seal of the empire is pressed with that small soft knuckle on a door sound of the world, saying, "Quietly, you may pass," and the sound seems very small out here against the huge darkening sky. And then they are through. The gate is behind them, the garrison lamps fall away and are gone, and with them the last wall of the empire, the corridor, the beacon towers, the whole long stitched together safety of China, all sinking down into the dark at their backs. Ahead there is no wall, no tower, no gate, no soldier, no stamp. Ahead there is only the road, the desert and the night and the road running out into it, and the bells, and the soft fall of the camels' feet in the sand, and the strange settling thing is that it is enough. There is nothing to fear, and nothing to decide, and nowhere to be but here, on the road, in the dark, going on. And the night is enormous. You have stood under many skies, but never one quite like this, for out here beyond the last door, with no town for 100 miles to throw up its smudge of smoke, the air is so clean and dry and empty that the whole roof of the heavens comes down close and opens itself entirely, black and clear and crowded from edge to edge with stars. The great pale river of them spilling across the sky from one dark horizon to the other. The old travellers used to say, not really exaggerating, that on such a night you could read a letter by starlight alone, and you can almost believe it, because the light that falls is that soft and plentiful and still. Let your eyes rest in it as you walk, and feel how it asks nothing of you, only that you look. And ahead the road winds on to the next well, which lies 2 nights ahead, and this is the thing to rest upon, that the well is known. It has a name. The master has watered here before, and his master before him, and its distance is counted, and there is grain enough on the camels and skins, enough filled to carry every one of you gently across the gap with plenty to spare. So that out here in all this vastness there is nothing to fear and nothing to decide. Someone worked all of that out long ago, and all that is left for you tonight is the walking, and the walking will be done by your own 2 feet, without your even asking them. So let us listen to the sound of it, for the sound of a caravan moving through the desert at night is one of the most steadying sounds there is, a slow braided rope of small rhythms twisted together. There are the bells, on every 10th camel or so, swinging with the long, slow rock of the stride, a scattering of soft low notes out of time with one another, not ringing but tolling, one and then another, and then two together, and then one alone, a slow loose music with no tune and no end, the sound of the whole line telling itself in the dark that it is still all here, and under the bells the sound of the feet, the crunch as each broad soft foot presses into the cool sand and the hush as it lifts, hundreds of feet a little out of step so it blurs into one long shuffling whisper. And under all of it, lowest, the breathing, the deep slow breathing of the great animals, dozens of huge soft chests rising and falling all around you, an enormous patient drowsy respiration that seems to belong not to any one beast but to the whole caravan at once, as though the long line of you were a single sleepy creature breathing its way across the sand. And somewhere inside all of that, if you listen, is your own breath, folded in among the bells and the feet and the great slow breathing, until you can no longer tell which breath is yours and which belongs to the night, so let it blur and let your breathing go down and join the rest. And at the head walks the master, doing the one piece of real work the night requires, finding the way, steering by the stars the way a sailor steers across an ocean with no marks upon it, and yet he is not lost. Because up above him the sky is a map that does not change. There is one point in the north, one still point, the one place in all that wheeling heaven that does not move, that the others turn slowly around through the whole night, and he keeps that still point set just over his right shoulder and a little behind, and as long as it stays there he knows he is walking west and a touch to the south, on toward the well, on toward Khotan, on toward the jade. And he said something once, when a young man asked whether it was not fearful to guide so many lives across so much nothing, by nothing but a few far lights, and he said no. It was the simplest thing in the world, that this is all any of us really do at night, out here or anywhere. We find the few lights we have learnt to trust, and keep them steady over our shoulder, and walk on, and do not ask the darkness for anything more. Let that settle into you as you drift. Find the few lights you trust, keep them over your shoulder, walk on. There is nothing else the night requires. Now let me tell you about the camels, for they are the true masters of this crossing, and the men speak of them with a love that has much respect folded into it. These great shaggy Bactrians of the cold deserts know things no man knows. They can smell sweet water from a full day's walk away across all that emptiness, and it is not a story. Every driver will tell you of the time they were certain the well lay dead ahead to the east, and yet the led camel kept drifting patiently a little south of east. And at last the master let her have her head and followed her, and she brought them straight to the water right the whole time. And when they come to water, they drink the way nothing else on earth drinks, taking it in long steady draughts, 30 gallons and more in 10 or 12 minutes, and then lift their dripping mouths and are done, and will not need it again for a week. And they know one thing more, the thing that matters most, for they can feel a storm coming while the sky is still clean, hours before the cleanest-eyed man can see the least smudge on the horizon. And so there is a ritual no one argues with. The led camels, without being told, suddenly stop and kneel, folding those long legs down with a slow, enormous dignity, turning their hindquarters round to face a wind that is not yet blowing, and sealing their nostrils shut behind 2 soft folds of skin like little doors drawn to, and lowering those double rows of long lashes over their eyes, shutting the storm out before it arrives. And when the camels do that, the whole caravan calmly makes its camp, right there, no hurry and no fright, for the animals have given warning in time. The drivers couch each camel the way you go round a house at evening closing the shutters, and the bales are stacked into a low thick wall on the windward side, and then you lie down together in the lee of the beasts and the bales, warm, close, wrapped up, while the storm comes on and passes over, high up, a great rushing and streaming of sand across the sky above you, weather moving over the top of you the way it moves over the back of some huge sleeping animal that does not even wake, and underneath it, in the warm dark at the bottom of the world, the whole caravan simply sleeps and waits and lets it pass, And in the morning the wind falls and the sky is clean and washed and crowded once more, with stars, and you load and walk on as though nothing had happened, because in the long life of this desert, nothing much has. So that is the shape of the crossing, night after night. 2 nights of walking, or 3, dusk to dawn, and then as the sky grows pale and rose you halt and make the day camp, stretching the awnings into low flat roofs of shade, and sleep away the white blaze of the noon, and at dusk you rise and load and walk again. And then one dawn there is a change in the far edge of the world. The camels feel it first, lifting their heads and quickening, for on the wind they have caught the smell of green, and then low on the horizon comes a thin dark fringe. The tops of the poplars first, and then the whole low green shape of an oasis lifting out of the sand, a village built all of mud, the soft warm colour of the very ground it stands upon, so that it looks less a thing set down on the desert than a thing the desert has gently risen up into, and around it the green, and threaded through it the little channels of water running and shining, and there is a well and shade, and children who come running out to count the camels and stare and fall back laughing, and an old man in the gate who lifts his chin to the master in the smallest of greetings, a nod that says only, "You have come, and the water is good, and you may rest." And you rest, one green night, in the sound of the poplars, which move in the least wind with a soft dry rushing almost exactly like distant rain, so that you fall asleep to the sound of a rain that never comes and never needs to. And then in the dusk you rise and load and walk back out into the sand, on to the next one, for these oases are laid across the desert like stepping stones set across a river too wide to see the far bank of, and you cross it one green stone at a time, resting on each, and then trusting yourself out again onto the dark water of the sand. And a gentle thing about this desert, that it is a keeper far more than a taker. Off to the north the caravan men speak quietly of a place called Lulan, once a living town with streets and houses and a garrison and gardens beside a lake at the desert's edge. And then, one season long ago, the river that fed it, the wandering Tarim, which has never been willing to stay in one bed, shifted quietly and moved to a new channel, and the lake drew slowly aside after it, and the water simply went somewhere else. And so the people did the unhurried thing people out here have always done. They gathered their bundles and followed the water to wherever it had gone, and left. There was no catastrophe in it, only a town emptying gently as its river walked away. And the strange and beautiful part is what the desert did next, which was nothing, which was simply to keep it. For the air here is so dry it does not let things rot, and so to this day the streets of Lulan still stand, the timber posts still upright in their rows, the mud brick walls still holding their corners, and inside, they say, baskets still keeping their shape, and folded letters still lying where they were set down, waiting with perfect patience for a hand that went away 1,000 years ago and is never coming back, none of it grieving, all simply kept, held dry and safe in the desert's long, slow memory. And somewhere in the deep middle of this stretch the master says a soft thing, almost to himself, that you are almost halfway now, almost halfway of the whole 4,000 miles, the great midpoint coming up quietly under your feet without any mark to show it, and almost halfway of the night too, the deep still middle hours when the sleep is at its deepest. Beyond the next oasis, he says, lies the city of Jade, where 2 rivers come down out of the mountains carrying their precious stones. And beyond that the road at last turns the far corner of the desert and begins, ever so slowly, to climb toward the roof of the world. But all of that is still ahead, nothing to reach for tonight. Tonight there is only the walking, and the bells, and the still point over your right shoulder, and the green stones coming one after another out of the dark. And you will notice, as the night wears on, that they begin to come closer together, the gaps of sand growing shorter, the desert loosening its grip, the land growing kinder and wetter with every mile. And then, one evening, you will wait for the green to end as it always ends, in a wall of sand on the far side, and it will not end. It will only widen, spreading out along the foot of the great snow mountains and keeping on spreading, orchard beyond orchard and field beyond field, until there is no far edge to it that you can see, and the whole long tired line of animals will let out one great soft sigh together as the sand gives way for good and the good cool earth comes up to meet them, and you will walk on into the wide green, into the greenest of all the kingdoms of the southern road, walking gently down at last into Khotan. Let the caravan carry you in slowly, for a place like this is not to be rushed. The road runs between orchards, apricot and mulberry and walnut, their branches meeting overhead so you pass under a low green roof with the last gold of the sun coming through the leaves in coins and ribbons, and on either hand the fields run away rich, threaded everywhere with little glittering channels of water. For Khotan has learned over 1,000 years how to catch the mountain's gift and lead it patiently from field to field, and everywhere is that small ceaseless sound of water finding its way along a ditch, the softest lullaby a farming country ever made. And Khotan is famous, as long as there has been a road to be famous on, for 3 gentle things, and we take them one at a time. The first is simply the gardens themselves, this astonishing greenness, this proof that patience and water can make a paradise in the teeth of the desert, so that merchants coming in half dead from the sand have wept a little without shame at the sight of Khotan's orchards, and called it, in a dozen languages, the garden at the end of the sand. Rest there a moment, under the meeting branches, with the water talking in the ditches, and let the second fame come to you, the water and the 2 rivers that bring it. Khotan sits where 2 rivers come combing down out of the Kunlun, that enormous white wall along the whole southern edge of the world, running down out of the snow and across the flatland and past the town and out into the desert to the north, where, in the way of desert rivers, they simply thin and sink and end in the sand, having given everything to the fields along the way. And the people named these rivers not for any king or battle, but for what they carry, so one is the White Jade River and the other the Black Jade River. And that brings us gently to the third and greatest fame, the jade. For deep in those southern mountains, locked in the grey rock, run veins of jade, that hard and holy stone the whole East has loved above all others, and every summer, when the high snows melt, the meltwater comes roaring down in floods and tears the jade loose in lumps and boulders and rolls it down, and here is the patient miracle. The rivers do not merely carry the jade, they work it. For as the flood tumbles the stones along the bed, mile after mile, month upon month, year upon year, it rounds off their sharp edges and wears away their rough skins, so that a stone that began as a raw, jagged lump broken from a cliff arrives as a smooth, rounded cobble, gentle to the hand, its beauty already half revealed by nothing but water and time. And then, when the summer floods sink and the rivers run low and clear in the golden late season, the people of Khotan go down to gather the harvest the mountains and the water have prepared, and this is the thing above all to hold and drift upon, one of the softest kinds of work human beings have ever devised. They go jade fishing. Men and women, barefoot, wade out into the low cold rivers in the long slanting gold of the afternoon, and walk slowly upstream against the gentle current, and here is the secret of it. You cannot truly see jade among the stones of that riverbed, for the bed is paved with 10,000 wet grey cobbles, all glistening alike, and true jade hides among them looking no different from any common stone, so a person could stare all day and be fooled again and again. But you can feel it. The old jade fishers learned over generations that the surest way is not with the eyes at all, but with the bare soles of the feet, wading slow and patient upstream, feeling the riverbed with the naked skin of the soul. Because true jade, the finest kind, which the carvers call by the tender name of mutton fat for its soft white richness, has a particular feeling to it, a smoothness smoother than the smoothness of ordinary stone, a faint unmistakable warmth, a kind of held light, as though the stone had kept a little of the sun's touch, so that a bare foot moving over the cold grey cobbles will know it, will pause, will feel not just another whetstone, but that particular smooth, warm, nearly living thing. And the fisher stoops into the cold water and closes a hand around it, and lifts it dripping into the gold light, and turns it once slowly to be sure, and then drops it, without fuss, into the waste bag and wades on, feeling for the next, so that a whole day's harvest of the most precious stone in the Eastern world is gathered one stone at a time, by patience and bare souls and the slow reading of a riverbed with the skin of the foot. Hold that softly as you sink a little deeper, the barefoot figures spread along the shining low river in the last light, stooping and rising, the water talking around their ankles, the white mountains enormous behind them, no hurry anywhere in it at all, and those stones went out along the very road you are travelling, 3,000 miles eastward, back through the Jade Gate itself, and on at last to the workshops of Chang'an, where a single stone might be given a whole year of a craftsman's life. One man bent over it for the turning of a full year, cutting and grinding and rubbing it slowly into the shape of a disc or a dragon or a small pendant, because jade is far too hard to carve as you carve wood, and can only be worn patiently down with harder sand and endless rubbing, so that to shape it is itself an act of patience to match the patience of the river. And the emperors of the East, who could have had anything, loved this soft green stone above all their gold, and it is worth feeling why. For they loved it for the very qualities that do not shout. It is warm against the cheek, holding the heat of the hand, never cold and dead like metal. It rings when struck softly with a sweet clear singing note that hangs in the air, and it is beautiful without glitter. A quiet deep beauty you have to hold close and look into, and the old sages said jade was like the truly good person, because it does not flatter and does not lie. It is simply and evenly itself all the way through, warm and honest and unshowy, and that is why they set it above gold. Rest on that a while, the warm honest stone that a river carried 3,000 miles and a carver gave a year of his life to. Now cotton has a story of its own it likes to tell, worn smooth by the telling, until it has become almost the town's own bedtime tale. The story of how this desert garden came to hold the second of its fames, the silk. In the far-off time, the making of silk belonged to China alone, and China guarded the secret as a dragon guards its hoard, for the whole world wanted silk, and only China knew it came from small pale worms that eat mulberry leaves and spin cocoons of a single impossibly long thread, and so it was death for anyone to carry a silkworm or a mulberry seed out past the frontier. And the guards searched for exactly this, and the king of Khotan longed for silk, not merely for bales of the finished cloth which he could buy from any caravan, but for the making of it, to have the mulberry trees in his own gardens and the little worms spinning in his own halls, and there seemed no way on earth to come by it. So the king did a wise and roundabout thing. He asked the emperor of China for a bride, a princess of the imperial house to be his queen, and this was granted, a marriage to bind two thrones. And before the princess set out, the king's envoy came to her quietly and whispered the truth of her new home, that Khotan was fair and green, but had no mulberry trees and no silkworms, none at all, and that if she wished ever again to have the soft familiar cloth of her childhood about her in that far country, she must bring the beginning of it herself. And the princess understood. And so, when she set out in her great wedding procession, dressed as an imperial bride, she wore upon her head the tall towering headdress of her rank, heavy with ornaments, and hidden there, tucked into the soft padding among the coils of her elaborately dressed hair, she carried the whole secret of silk, a small store of silkworm eggs and a handful of mulberry seeds, the living beginning of an empire's greatest treasure, riding hidden in her hair. And when the procession came to the frontier, the guards did their duty and searched, opening every bale and box and going through the baggage of every servant, looking for exactly the thing passing under their noses, but not one of them dared lay a finger upon the head of an imperial bride, dared reach up and disturb the hair of a princess of the house of the emperor, and so they waved her through, headdress and all, and the most closely guarded secret in all the world left China not by war and not by theft, but simply and quietly, in a wedding procession at a gentle walking pace, under music, beneath a canopy, in the hair of a princess. And she came to Khotan, and in the good green earth of her new gardens she planted the mulberry seeds and woke the little eggs when the leaves came, and gathered the women of Khotan and taught them everything. The feeding of the worms and the tending of the cocoons and the unwinding and the weaving, and so Khotan became the first place anywhere outside China to make its own silk. The first crack in that great guarded wall. And there is a soft footnote to leave beside this as you drift. That far away at the other end of this very road, in the great city we are still many nights from reaching, this story will one day find its mirror. For there too the secret of silk will slip past a guarded frontier, carried not in a princess's hair but, so it is said, in the hollow walking staves of two travelling monks, but that is a tale for a far later night, and we need only smile at it now and let it go. And so, if you were to walk through Khotan at dusk, in the blue hour when the lamps are lit behind the mud walls, you would hear from the houses on either hand a sound you might not expect in a desert garden at the far edge of everything. The sound of looms, the steady thump and slide of the weavers, the beater knocking the threads tight and the shuttle sliding across, over and over, from house after house, a whole town softly weaving in the evening. So that Khotan, which for so long had only watched the treasure caravans come through and pass on, now sat in the middle of the road, making that same treasure with its own hands, a quiet triumph of patience over distance, and the sound of those looms in the dusk is a good sound to fall asleep inside. Thump and slide. Thump and slide. As steady as the water in the ditches and the bells on the camels and your own slow breathing under the blanket. Rest there, in the lamplit dusk, among the looms, for as long as you like. And then, in its own time, the road goes on, running west out of Khotan and beginning slowly to bend north, following the great curve of the land around the corner of the desert, the way easy here and green, through Yarkand of the gardens, the villages coming so close together now that the desert seems for a while to have given up its long dominion, until the southern rim you have followed for so many nights curves round at last to meet its twin, the northern rim coming down to join it, and there, exactly where they join, where the whole vast circle of the desert finally closes and the roads that ran along both its rims come together into one, stands the town that has grown rich and old simply by being the place where everything meets, and its name is Kashgar. Come into Kashgar slowly, in the full flood of its daytime life, for it must be felt in its crowd, a walled town old beyond easy telling, and the whole of it hums, a great warm blended humming that one traveller described exactly right when he said the town hummed like a beehive that had decided to be friendly, busy and loud and close-packed, and yet good-natured all the way through. At its heart lies the great bazaar, and there is no wonder on the whole road quite like it for sheer abundance. For here where all the roads meet, all the goods of all the roads are piled together under the sun and the awnings. The melons above all stacked in pyramids taller than the men who sell them, and the smell of them mixing with dust and donkeys and bread baking in the round clay ovens, and everywhere the sound of the bargaining, 40 languages at least all haggling at once, and here is the marvel, almost no one is angry. For all that noise is not the noise of a quarrel, but of 10,000 friendly deals being struck. A fair price, a fair price. Friend, spreading hands and shaking heads and laughing and settling, all day long. And there are the working streets, for Kashgar makes as well as sells. A whole street of the blacksmiths where the hammers ring on the anvils all day, and the rope makers and the felt makers and the saddlers and the sellers of bells and packs and all the 1,000 things a caravan wears out and must replace. Because the deep true trade of Kashgar is the road itself. And nowhere is that clearer than in the animal market out beyond the bazaar, which is the place where the desert quietly hands the caravan onto the mountains. For Kashgar stands at the foot of the last and highest barrier of all, and here the beasts of the flat sand are of no more use. So the 2 humped desert camels that have carried you and everything you own for so many hundreds of miles are led up and traded away, sold on to caravans heading back east into the deserts they were made for, and you feel a small tug at the parting. But they are going home to their own country and their own work, and in their place stand the animals of the mountains, the yaks above all, creatures built for cold, black and enormously shaggy, their long hair hanging almost to the ground like a heavy skirt, deep-chested and short-legged and broad, with a slow, patient eye. And around the necks of the led yaks hang bells of a different voice altogether, lower and slower and deeper, so the very sound of the caravan is about to change. And so, one more time before you sleep, watch the master at his work. A quiet pleasure to see a thing done by someone who truly knows how. He settles first with the desert guides, paying them off with a word of real thanks, looking each man in the face, and a wage generous by exactly the right amount. Not so little as to send a good man away sour, and not so much as to seem a soft touch. Just enough over the fair figure to say plainly, "You did well, and I know it." Then he turns to the mountain men, and here he does not hurry, sitting down to it over long unhurried glasses of tea, listening far more than he talks, weighing who is steady and who is boastful, because up there a steady man is worth more than a clever one. And he chooses his yaks not by their size or coats, but by their tempers, laying a flat open hand quietly on each one's back, reading through his palm whether this one is calm or skittish. Because a bad-tempered yak on a narrow high path is a danger to everything behind it. And then he does the last thing, the thing that shows the true master, spending a whole quiet afternoon when he might have rested, re-roping every single load, laying everything flat and even and snug. Because where you are going next the paths turn back sharply upon themselves on the steep slopes, and a load that rode fine across 1,000 flat miles will on the first tight switchback chafe thee. Animals back roar if it is not packed exactly right. And only when it is all done does he let the caravan rest, a full night of it, in a great caravanserai by the western gate, the last real roof before the mountains, and if you lie on your back you can look straight up out of the square open courtyard and see the sky framed there, a perfect square of night, and in it the same steering stars you have watched wheel over every desert of this journey, the same still northern point, keeping their slow watch over you here just as out on the open sand. And away to the west, past the barred gate, stand the mountains, the Pamirs, the great white wall you must climb next, enormous and silent and cold, and yet there is nothing fearful in them tonight, because they are not going anywhere, and neither, until morning, are you, and the mountains have all the time in the world, and wait without the least impatience, the way the truly old and truly great always wait. Everything is paid, everything roped and flat and ready, the gate barred and the walls thick, and the fire warm, and there is nothing left tonight that needs a single thought from you. Nothing to do now but lie warm within the thick walls under the square of steering stars. And breathe, and let the last of the day go, and sleep. And so, in the blue hour before the dawn, the caravan walks out through the western gate, and the great desert camels do not walk with it, left behind in the warm dark of the stalls, their long crossing finished, and in their place walk the yaks, bearing the loads now upon their broad patient backs, and the line comes out quietly, breath already showing pale in the cold, and turns its face to the west, and there filling the whole of the western sky, waiting exactly where they were left the night before, waiting as they have waited for 10,000 years, stand the great white Pamirs, the roof of the world. White shoulders rising above white shoulders, range behind range, each paler and higher and farther than the last, until the highest seem no longer to belong to the earth at all, but to the weather, like great banks of cloud that decided long ago to stop drifting and to stay, so that you cannot quite tell, in that blue hour, where the mountains end and the sky begins. For the road does not attack these mountains, does not fling itself straight at the high white walls, but negotiates them patiently, the way water negotiates a hillside, finding the give in it, following the valleys of the rivers up into the heart of the range in long slow curves, going the long way round because the long way round is the way that can be walked. And as the valley narrows, the caravan narrows with it, drawing into a single winding thread, one yak behind another, a dark thread drawn slowly up a vast pale slope, so small against the mountain that from across the valley you would take it for a line of ants. And the pace becomes the mountain pace, the oldest walking rhythm there is. A step, and then a breath, and then a step, and then a breath, the whole line moving to it together, and you may, if you like, let your own breathing find that rhythm now. A breath drawn in as the foot lifts and let out as the foot comes down, going nowhere, climbing nothing, but keeping the old mountain time. For the air thins as they climb, but it thins gently, by inches over hours and days, so the body has time to meet it. The change as soft as swimming down into the deep cool water at the top of a great still lake, no shock in it. Only a slow settling into somewhere higher and stiller than before. And there is a gift in this high place, one of the softest of the whole night, a sound, for the bells have changed. The yaks wear bells cast for the mountains, heavier bells hung lower on the broad black chests, and they do not ring, they toll, a deep, slow, dark sound, a wooden-throated knock, knock, knock. Low and round and unhurried, so deep that it seems to come up out of the ground itself. One animal and then another, near and then far. Some just ahead of you and some already around the shoulder of the slope above, and some far below on the switchback you climbed an hour ago, the deep tolling notes drifting up and down and crossing one another in the enormous silence. And oh, the silence, the vast and total snow silence of the high mountains against which those slow deep bells sound, a silence so large that the tolling does not break it, but seems only to measure it, the way the slow drip of water measures the quiet of a cave, knock and a long silence, and knock and a long silence, tolling the caravan up the roof of the world in the cold blue light. And you need not fear the height, for the mountain men at the front have crossed this pass 100 times, and know it as well as you know the way from your own bed to your own door in the dark. Reading the snow the way the desert men read the sand, so you may hand the whole weight of the crossing to them, and simply walk. A step, and a breath, and a step. Up they go, and up into a world simplified down to almost nothing, only rock and snow and sky and the pale smoke of your own breath rising, until even the mind grows as clean and empty and still as the air, and then at last the climbing eases, the slope lies back, and the caravan comes out onto the high broad saddle at the top of the pass, the great windy shelf slung between the peaks, the halfway place, and there on a rise above a cold green river stands the stone tower. Let us stand a while and look at it, in no hurry at all. It is a fort of grey stone, Tashkurgan, which means simply the stone tower, with the white mountains standing all around it in a great ring, peak beyond peak, like a council of elders gathered in silence around a fire. Tall and white-headed and grave and patient, looking down upon this small grey tower that men have kept here at the top of the world for longer than anyone can rightly say. And there is a story the merchants told and retold the whole length of the road, that here at this windy halfway mark the men of the silk who came up out of the east, and the men who came up to buy it from the west would meet and trade, the eastern men handing over their bales and turning for home, the western men taking up the silk and turning for home, so that for a great many of the men who walked it, the road was never the whole 4,000 miles at all, but only ever 2,000 miles out to a stone tower in the sky, and 2,000 miles home again, the silk itself going on without them, passed hand to hand. And the gentlest part is how the story itself outran the silk, for far away at the western end. In the bright cities by the Middle Sea, there were learned men, geographers, Greeks who had never seen a mountain of the Pamirs and never would, and they listened to the travellers who came home from the edges of the known world. And again the travellers spoke of a stone tower far to the east where the silk changed hands. And so they drew that stone tower onto their maps of the whole earth, marked it as a real and fixed place, the great eastern anchor of the measured world, one of the very pins they drove into the parchment and stretched the whole map upon. This small grey tower so high and far that hardly any of them could ever truly have imagined it. And yet there it sat, holding down the eastern edge of the world. and here, standing beside it, you are, just now, in the very middle. Half of everything lies behind you to the east, and half ahead to the west. The markets of Chang'an on the one scale pan, and the far lamps of Constantinople on the other. The two ends of the world balanced exactly, and you resting at the still point of the balance, at the top of the world, at the middle of the road, with the white peaks standing all around you like elders, and the deep bells tolling behind you on the path, and nothing at all required of you here. Only to stand in the exact middle and breathe the thin bright air, in and out, in the balance of the whole earth. And as you stand there the snow begins, but it is not a storm, only a curtain. Great soft slow flakes drifting down out of the high grey, no wind to drive them, drawn gradually across the whole valley, the way a curtain is drawn slowly across a window at bedtime, softening the far peaks first, then the near ones, then the green river, then the grey tower, and the yaks walk on through it entirely unbothered. For this is their weather and their home, the snow settling upon their broad black backs, and not even melting there, lying soft and white upon the black. And when the light begins to fail there is shelter, a low round-shouldered hut of thick stone half dug back into the slope, so the mountain shields it, its one small doorway hung with heavy felt. And inside, in the middle of the single round room, a fire is burning, small and red and steady and warm, and around it, packed close, gathers everything, every traveller and every guide. Settling shoulder to shoulder in the red firelight with their backs to the warm stone, the yaks bedded down just outside against the sheltered wall, and outside the snow goes on falling upon the empty pass, filling the day's footprints, and the river talks quietly to itself under its skin of new ice, and inside the thick warm dark, nothing is wrong, nothing at all is going wrong, the fire holds. The walls hold, the animals breathe in the dark just outside, and one by one the men sleep, high up under the falling snow, in the warm stone heart of the mountains, while the whole white world goes on being silent all around them. Rest there. There is no way you need to be but there, by that small red fire, with the snow falling on the empty pass, and nothing going wrong. And then, in the days that follow, comes the going down, the long, slow, grateful going down that the body remembers with gratitude for years, the path leading always downward now, the mountains opening and lowering on either side, and with every day the air thickens sweetly, so that each breath comes a little easier, and the world climbs back up through all its stages in reverse. The deep snow to patched snow, the patched snow to bare wet stone, the stone to the first thin grass creeping green between the rocks, the thin grass to real meadow grass thick and soft and dotted with small mountain flowers, and the animals put their heads down and tear at it as they walk, glad of it after so much rock, and down the caravan goes. And down, until the walls of the mountains draw fully back and open, and there below spreads a wide and famous valley, opening out like a great green bowl held up in cupped hands toward the white peaks behind. And this is Fergana, one of the fairest valleys in all the world, ringed with mountains and floored with green, and here an old promise made far back at the beginning of our journey is quietly kept. For you may remember the envoy Zhangqian, and among the wonders he came back with, one that set the emperor's heart alight lived here, for here were bred the finest horses in all the world, the heavenly horses, tall and long-limbed and swift, of which ran a marvellous rumour that they sweated blood, that when they ran their hardest the sweat that darkened their necks ran red, and the truth is likely softer and lovelier than the rumour, for picture one of these tall horses in the cool of the early morning, running out across the green valley in the low light of the newly risen sun, its neck and shoulders darkened and gleaming with the honest sweat of its running, and the low sun striking across that wet gleaming coat and turning the whole animal to burnished red gold. So it runs shining like a kettle catching the firelight, and a tired traveller standing dazzled at the edge of the field may surely be forgiven for carrying that picture home 1,000 miles and telling, by the fire, of the horses that sweat and bleed light. And the emperor so longed for them that he sent whole missions marching the entire terrible width of the deserts you have already crossed only to bring them home. So the horses came walking eastward down the road, just as the jade and the silk came walking westward, everything trading places, everything beautiful in this whole world, getting up sooner or later and travelling to where it is longed. 4. And that is the quiet chorus that hums under the whole road, that nothing lovely stays where it is born. And from the green bowl of Fergana the road runs gently on, following now a kind and generous river, the Zaravshan, whose name means the scatterer of gold, and it earns the name, for the valley fills and fills with green, with orchards heavy and dark, with rows of mulberry trees. With the good brown smell of turned and watered earth, the green growing thicker and richer and almost loud after so many weeks of stone and sand and snow. And there ahead, where the valley widens toward the plain, something is beginning to rise into view, the great blue heart of the middle road, and it is more than a city to the man who leads this caravan, for it is his own, it is home, it is the city of his own people, and its name is Samarkand. And so we come down along the golden river in the slow gold of the afternoon, walking more softly than we have walked in many miles, because this is home now, and the pace slows all on its own the way a horse slows and lifts its head when it smells its own stable, because these orchards are his orchards, and these people spreading across the green fields are his people, the Sogdians, the country of the merchants, the beating heart of the whole long road, because that is what the Sogdians were, and it is a lovely and simple thing to hold, that just as some peoples were peoples of farmers bent all their lives over the soil, and some were peoples of sailors born looking out to sea, the Sogdians were a people of merchants, traders to the very marrow, and they thought it the finest thing a person could be, and they were, for 1,000 years, the great middlemen of Asia, who stood in the middle of everything and passed the goods of the world hand to hand across the centre of the earth. They did not, most of them, grow the silk, or weave the wool, or blow the glass, or dig the jade. They moved it, buying in the east and selling in the west, and buying in the west and selling in the east, speaking 4 or 5 tongues without effort, because a man who trades must speak with everyone, so that they became the road's translators as well as its carriers, and the road for many long centuries spoke Sogdian the way a later world would lean on other common tongues. And their children learned merchantry the way other children learn songs, early and in the bone, learning not only their letters but their numbers and weights and measures, the looping flowing Sogdian script that leans and links along the line, and the great table of exchanges that was the map of their future life, how much silk buys how much musk buys how much glass, learning it all as a kind of second song that hummed under everything. And a great Sogdian merchant house was not a shop but a family spread like a net across the whole width of the world, keeping its sons and cousins and trusted agents planted in every great city along the road, one brother in Chang'an where the silk was made, another at Dunhuang by the desert's edge, another keeping the accounts in Merv. So the family became a living chain reaching thousands of miles, each link a man in a distant city who could buy and sell and store the goods and send word back, and along that chain in both directions went letters, a constant patient stream of them, of prices and silk grades and who owed what to whom, letters of business and family folded together and running underneath the figures. Again and again, the plain ache of homesickness, a man far off in a foreign city, writing back down the road to his mother or his wife, that he is well, that he has heard nothing in 3 years, that he does not know if she still lives, that he is so very far from home. And here is the wonder to plant now, and carry with you, that some of those very letters, real letters written by real Sogdian hands upon this very road, were dropped or abandoned or simply lost, tucked into a bag left in a watchtower out in the desert, and the dry sand kept them safe and folded and waiting for well over 1,000 years, until in our own time they were found again, lifted out of the dust with the ink still legible. So that we know these people not as a legend but as correspondents, whose actual private words we can read, whose worries about a shipment of silver, and whose longing for a wife they had not seen in years come to us straight from their own pens across all those centuries, and we will come back to one of those letters at the very end of our journey. So let it rest quietly in the corner of your mind for now, a folded letter in the sand, waiting. And now, in the golden end of the afternoon, we come up to the gates of the city itself, and I want us to do here, in the merchant's own home, the thing we have not quite let ourselves do in all these miles, which is to stop and look, lovingly and slowly, at the humble and enormous secret of the entire Silk Road, the thing that made all of it possible. More than the camels, and more than the silk, and more even than the merchants, and that secret is a building, the plainest and most beautiful building on the road, the Caravanserai. The walled rest house of the caravans, and once you have truly seen one, you have seen the whole road, because the whole road is only this, over and over. Picture it in the low light, a square fort of mud, brick or stone, strong and plain, its blank outer walls turned like a shoulder against the desert and the night, and set into one of those walls a single gate, only one, built tall and wide to a very particular measure, the exact size of a fully loaded camel, so a great beast piled high with its bales can pass through without catching, and no larger, so the whole safety of the place hangs on that one careful opening. And you pass through it, and the first thing that meets you, before your eyes even settle, is a sound, and it is always the same sound. It is the sound of water. For at the centre of the wide courtyard, open to the whole darkening sky, there stands a well, or a fountain, and the trickle and plash of it is the first greeting every arrival receives across the whole length of the road, and the tired animals lift their heads toward it, and the men breathe out at the sound of it. Around that open court run the arched bays, deep shadowed stalls where the animals are led, and the loads stacked, smelling of hay and rope and dust, and warm animal, and the dung fires, and above them runs an upper gallery reached by stairs, off which open the little rooms where the traders sleep, small plain cells, bare and clean, and here is the quiet genius of the design, that each trader takes the room directly above his own goods. So a man sleeps in the upper cell with his bales, and beasts in the bay just beneath him. His whole fortune stacked in the dark directly below the floor he lies on, breathing quietly under him all night, and there is no safer bank on all the earth than that. No vault so secure as sleeping with your own body laid over your own treasure inside a barred square fort in the middle of nowhere. And these walled inns were set out along the whole immense road at a spacing as gentle and regular as breathing, about 25 or 30 miles apart, the distance a loaded camel can walk in a single easy day, so the whole 4,000 miles of the road, the whole terrifying width of deserts and mountains we have crossed together, is quietly divided into nothing more frightening than a string of single days, each beginning at a walled court in the morning and ending at another by evening, so that no traveller ever really faces the 4,000 miles at all. Only ever today's 25. Only ever the gentle span between one barred gate and the next. And when the day's walk is done and the beasts are watered and stalled, the courtyard fills with the soft life of the evening, small fires kindled across the open ground and clay lamps lit along the gallery, and the smell of bread on hot stones and mutton turning and tea steaming, and here is one of the sweetest sounds of the whole road, the storytelling in the firelight. For around a single fire you might find 6 tongues at once, a Sogdian and a Chinese, and a Persian and a Turk, and an Indian and a Greek. Men who share no full language and yet somehow follow one another, trading tales and news across the little flames, and the news has walked as slowly as the camels, so a man may gravely report as fresh a piece 3,000 miles and half a year out of date. All of it wonderfully, harmlessly late, the whole world's gossip arriving at the pace of a walking camel. And then, at full dark, the keeper swings shut that single great gate and drops the heavy bar across it, and the bar comes down with a deep and final and deeply comforting sound, a sound that closes the day like a full stop at the end of a long sentence. Everyone in, everything safe. The desert shut outside, and that soft heavy thud of the bar is the sound a whole road falls asleep to. And this is the thought to lay in your hands as you drift, that the entire 4,000-mile Silk Road, the whole vast and famous thing, is really nothing more than this one warm barred courtyard, repeated about 120 times over from one end to the other. 120 wells, 120 gates, 120 sleeps. And any traveller who ever crossed the whole of it crossed it only ever one safe courtyard at a time, and so may you. Now let the walls of Samarkand gather around us, for the merchant city has gifts to give, and we take them slowly. There are the peaches first, the famous golden peaches of Samarkand, great peaches big as a fist and fragrant and yellow as lamplight. So prized that they were sent as royal gifts all the way to the Emperor of Far China, and think of the tenderness of the sending. For a fresh peach spoils in a day, and yet they wished the Emperor to taste this fruit grown 4 months' journey away, so they packed the peaches in snow brought down from the mountains, in boxes lined with lead to hold the cold, and set fast riders to carry them in relays, galloping the boxes eastward faster than any caravan could dream, so that the Emperor at the far end of the world might open a box and lift out a peach of Samarkand still cool from a mountain he would never see. And listen, up from the courtyard below comes a music, the sound of a lute, a pear-bodied, bent-necked instrument cradled in a player's lap. And this too is a gift of the road, for that same lute travelled out of the middle of the world in both directions at once, along the two arms of the road, going east where it became the Peeper of China, and west where it became the Oud of the Arab lands, and from the Oud, further west, the lutes and then the guitars of Europe, all of them children of this one pear-shaped instrument. So that the musician bending over his strings in this Samarkand courtyard tonight is without knowing it sending his melody 1,000 years and half a world in each direction at once. And now the quietest gift of all, the greatest, and it is paper. There was long ago a battle fought by a river called the Talas, in a year we may name as 751, and the battle itself is not the point at all. What matters is a small human thing that happened in its wake, that among the captives carried back into Samarkand were men who knew how to make paper, Chinese paper makers, who carried in their hands and memory a craft the Western world did not yet possess. And the craft was this, gentle and patient, that you take the inner bark of the mulberry tree and soak it, and beat it soft and long in water until it breaks down into a fine floating pulp, a cloud of fibres drifting in a vat, and then dip a fine screen down into the vat and lift it up flat and even. And as the water drains there is left behind a thin trembling film of matted fibre, a single wet sheet, which you turn out and press and dry until it lies flat and pale and smooth as poured cream, ready to take the ink. And Samarkand, sitting on its river with its groves of mulberry, took to this craft as though it had been waiting for it forever, turning the watermills to the beating of the pulp, so that the fine white paper of Samarkand became famous across the world. And here is why it mattered so much, more even than the peaches or the lute, and it is a matter of simple cost. For in the Western world until now, if you wished to write, you wrote on parchment made from animal skins, and it took a whole flock to make the leaves of a single large book, so a copied book cost, quite literally, a herd of sheep, and only the rich and the temples and the kings could own more than a few. But paper is made from the bark of a fast-growing tree, and from rags and old worn-out rope, from almost nothing, so paper was cheap. Cheap enough that ordinary people might one day own the written word, and the merchants of Samarkand did the only thing a merchant ever does. They added a new bale to the load, and paper set out westward along the road as a good to be sold. And think of the difference, softly, between the two great goods now travelling this road, for the silk carried only its own loveliness on someone's back. But paper would carry everything, every poem that would ever be written, and every table of the stars, and every merchant's ledger, and every homesick letter, and every idea the world would ever have. All of them one day riding on this cheap pale stuff first beaten out beside a river in Samarkand, so that of all the treasures on the road, this plain white sheet was quietly the most precious thing that ever moved along it. And a few days on the road carries us west to the sister city, holier Bukhara, the city of scholars, whose great bazaars were roofed over with domes of brick that turned the streets into cool tunnels of shade, the light falling soft and grey gold through openings in the domes, each trade in its own quarter, here the coppersmiths, there the silk stacked cool in the shade. And new in this age, wonderful, there were the bookstalls, fat and heavy with volumes now, books of paper stacked and stitched, where you could find a book of grammar and a book of medicine and a book of poetry, and a book on the movements of the stars, real learning laid out for sale like melons. And I will leave you in Bukhara with one small picture. A boy standing at that stall counting coins slowly out of his palm to buy himself a book he can afford. A book that exists in his hands at all only because, somewhere upriver and not so long ago, a mulberry tree was given over to feed a papermaker instead of a silkworm, so learning came cheap enough to reach a boy's 2 hands. And then we go out at first light, and the bales that ride with us now are richer than any we have carried. For stacked on the same patient beasts go silk and paper and jade all at once, the 3 quiet ambassadors of the East in one load, and we carry them down out of the last of the green to the wide slow river the maps will call the Amu Darya, sliding broad and brown and unhurried, where the flat low ferries wait to carry the animals over, the beasts led down one at a time onto the planks. The river carrying us across as gently as everything else on this road. And beyond the far bank the land opens into the last great dryness, the Karakum, the black sands, and if the name sounds fearsome you may let it soften. For the desert has not been cruel to us, only vast and quiet, a great dark floor rolled out under the stars, the sand gone the colour of charcoal, as though the ground had been dusted with the ash of some enormous long cold fire, and we walk upon it by night, always by night, sleeping when the world is bright, and walking when it is dark. And there is something in that turned over rhythm that suits the drifting mind, to be moving softly through the cool dark, while the harsh light waits somewhere on the far side of sleep. And now, riding among the loads, the new bale, the paper, the smooth pale stacked sheets that as yet hold nothing at all, blank and patient and dreaming of all the words that will one day be written upon them, none of them thought yet, all of them waiting, carried across the black sand toward the west. And then, on the 4th morning, the man at the front reins in and lifts a hand to shade his eyes, and it takes the breath a little even now, a line of green along the edge of the world, a true clean line of living green laid straight across the horizon like the far shore of a sea seen from a boat, and above it, faint in the haze, the shapes of walls and towers, and rising the whole length of it, straight into the windless morning air, the standing smoke of 10,000 breakfast fires. That is Merv, the oasis queen of the sands, in this age one of the very largest cities on the whole round earth, for a stretch of years perhaps the largest of all, very nearly 1 million souls. And here is the wonder, that all of it sits ringed on every side by a desert that will not grow so much as a single blade of wheat. And how can that be? Far to the south, days away, there are high cold mountains with snow on their heads, and out of them comes a river, the Merkab, running down and turning north into the desert, away from any sea, and a river running out into a desert is a river with nowhere to go. So as it crosses the burning flat the Merkab simply, quietly, gives up. It spreads, fanning out wider and slower, losing itself in 100 channels, and where it spreads it, it makes a great green fan laid down upon the desert, miles across, and in the palm of that fan sits Merv, like a single jewel set in an open hand. And the people of Merv, over 1,000 years, learned to comb that water, to gather and part it, and lead it exactly where they wished, into hundreds of great canals feeding smaller canals, feeding little ditches you could step across, a whole vast tree of water laid over the land, and they kept a great water clock in the city, whose whole purpose was to measure out each farmer's fair share of the flow, the water portioned as carefully as bread among children, so that the entire oasis was in truth one enormous instrument. A single machine of moving water, tended by tens of thousands of hands and kept in tune for 1,000 years without ceasing. And out of that watered ground came wheat and cotton and grapes heavy on the vine, and above all the melons, the famous melons of Merv, sweet and golden, the finest of them packed each one alone in snow inside sealed boxes, and carried hundreds of miles westward to the Caliph's own court at Baghdad. And that word, snow, brings us to the small wonder of Merv I would save if I could save only one. Out beyond the gardens, standing up against the pale sky, are great cones of mud brick. Tall as towers, wide at the bottom and drawing up to a point, ranged along the ground like the huge nests of some enormous patient bee, and these are the ice houses of Merv. For the desert, a furnace at noon in summer, turns bitterly cold in the short sharp nights of its winter, cold enough that shallow water left out under the winter stars will freeze, and the people learn to catch the winter and keep it, freezing sheet after sheet of thin ice through the cold weeks, and carrying it into the great cones, and laying it down, layer of ice and layer of straw, packing it up and up inside those thick earthen walls and sealing the whole thing shut. And the walls were so thick and the cones so cunningly shaped to hold the cold that the winter stored inside would keep, and keep deep into the terrible heart of August, so that on the very hottest day, when the sand outside would blister a bare hand, a man could walk in through the low door and down into the cool dark heart of the cone, into a hush of stored winter, and break loose a piece of January and carry it back out into the roaring August light, with winter itself melting in his two cupped hands. Hold that softly as you sink toward your own rest, the great mud cones standing patient against the sky, with winter sleeping inside them all summer long. And Merv was learned as well as Green, a city of books, for it is said it kept its libraries the way other cities keep their granaries, and one traveller counted the great libraries of Merv and made them 10. And in Merv there worked an astronomer who watched the slow wheel of the stars with such patience that he measured the true length of the year, the exact time the sun takes to come round again to where it started. Wrong by only a few minutes against the whole enormous turning of a year, won by nothing but watching, and counting, and watching again, where the air is dry and the nights are black, and the stars come down close enough to touch. And there is one more thing about the water of this country, the deepest and quietest genius of all the desert peoples, and it runs, quite literally, beneath our feet as we ride. The trouble always in a hot land is that the summer sun is a thief. It drinks the surface rivers dry and steals the water off the top of the ground, while all the good snowmelt waits far away in the gravels at the feet of the distant mountains, out of reach. And so, long ago, the diggers of this land worked out an answer so patient it hardly seems the work of ordinary men. It is called the Caravans, and further west the Qanat, and it is an underground river made by hand. A family of diggers, always families, fathers teaching sons, would go out to the foot of the mountains and sink a deep shaft down until they found the hidden water in the gravel, and then, from far out on the thirsty plain miles away, begin to dig a tunnel back toward it, underground, just tall enough for one man to crouch and work in, sloping ever so gently downhill, so that the water when let in would walk and not run, sliding along cool and slow beneath the ground for mile upon mile, with a shaft sunk to the surface every 50 yards to give the diggers air, so the water travelled the whole way from the mountain to the town underground, shaded and hidden from the thieving sun, never once evaporating, until it rose at the far end as a spring that simply never failed, that flowed in the worst drought of the cruelest summer as steadily as in spring, because its true source was a mountain's whole slow weight of snow 10 miles off and buried from the light. And I want to leave you with the tenderest thought in all of tonight's long road, that as we ride across the surface in the heat, water is walking beside us underground, cool and quiet and unhurried, in tunnels dug by hand by 10,000 patient men across 100 generations, not one of them a king, not one remembered by name, no monument, no glory, only the water still rising faithfully at the far end after 1,000 years. Now the land begins to lift, rising by long slow steps up onto the high Persian plateau, A great stony tableland lifted toward the sky, cooler and cleaner and wider, and here our track begins to braid itself into something older and firmer. For we are coming onto true roads laid down by the kings of Persia in an antiquity so deep it was already ancient when Rome was young, graded and measured and marked, with courier stations a day's ride apart all the way across the empire, and along them in the old days rode the king's own messengers, riders so faithful and tireless that a Greek historian wrote a line in their honour that has outlived every king they served, a line you may know without knowing where it came from, for it was carved, centuries later and half a world away, over the doors of a great post office in an American city, that neither snow nor rain nor heat nor the darkness of night could stay these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds, and here we ride the very ground that praise was first written about. And here, because the mind may wander where the tired body need not go, let us send only our drifting thoughts off the road a little way, south, to look a moment at the city all this eastern trade is flowing toward, at Baghdad, the round city, for the caliphs built it as a marvel of perfect circles, ring within ring, with the caliph's palace and the great mosque held at the very centre, like the dark still pupil at the centre of a calm eye. And near that centre stood a house that mattered more to the world, in the long run, than any palace, the House of Wisdom, filled with scholars and translators bent over their desks, stacked with the new cheap paper come all the way from Samarkand, doing the patient, priceless, unglamorous work of carrying everything across from one tongue into another, taking the geometry of the old Greeks and setting it into Arabic, taking the star tables of the Persians, taking from India the marvellous new way of writing numbers, the 9 little signs, and most wonderful of all, the small round sign that stands for nothing at all, for 0, the empty circle that makes all the other numbers behave, the very digits you yourself still write, and every copy they made went out again along these roads in every direction. Wisdom flowing outward from the round city like water combed out through the canals of Merv. And while our thoughts have wandered, let us notice what has been riding past us all night, going the other way, eastward, for the road is 2 rivers flowing opposite ways, and coming toward us out of the west is a marvel the east cannot yet make for itself, and that marvel is glass. Far ahead in Syria and along the shores of the Roman Sea sits a craftsman at his furnace with a long iron pipe in his hands, and on the end of it a glowing gob of molten glass, honey thick, the colour of firelight, and he lifts it to his lips and breathes into it, gently, no harder than you are breathing now, and as he breathes the gob swells and thins and cools until there hangs in the air a vessel with walls thinner than a soap bubble, a cup so clear you can set a candle behind it and see the flame straight through, so delicate that if you flick it with a fingernail it rings, a small pure note like a far-off bell across water. And the potters and jade cutters of the East, for all their genius, cannot yet catch light and breath and sand and turn them into something you can see. Through so Roman glass is packed as carefully as we pack our silk, wrapped in straw against the jolting, and sent east mile for mile as our silk goes west. And somewhere out in the dark our 2 lines pass each other, silk going one way and light going the other, and no one cheated in the trade, each end of the world sending the other the one beautiful thing it could not make for itself. Now the road gathers itself for its last great crossing, sloping down off the plateau into the flatter, stonier Syrian desert, and out in the middle of it, where by every sensible reckoning no city has the slightest business standing, a city stands, and it is Palmyra, though its own people called it Tadmor, the place of the palms, and the reason it is there, the reason it grew so improbably rich, is as simple and lovely as a fable, for at Palmyra there is a spring, an old and generous spring that breathes warm water up out of the ground and feeds a green pool and a grove of date palms in the midst of all that stone. One cool, wet living place set exactly halfway between the Roman West and the Persian East, and whoever holds the one good well on the long dry road between 2 empires holds a fortune in his hand, and the people of Palmyra grew wealthy not by conquering anyone, but simply by being the safe green place where everyone, coming and going, could stop and rest and water and pay a little for the privilege. So let us walk into it slowly in the last light. Down the middle of the city runs a great colonnaded street, most of a mile long, straight as a drawn line, lined its whole length with tall columns of honey-coloured stone, hundreds upon hundreds of them marching away into the distance and glowing golden in the low sun, with the desert wind moving softly between them, and there stands the great temple of Bel, the god of the sky, huge and calm within its walled court, and out along the ridge rise the tower tombs where the great families laid their dead, and set into their walls, carved in the pale limestone, are the portraits of the buried, faces of men and women gazing out level and calm across the desert, and at sunset the low light finds them, and they seem almost to be watching the evening come, patient, unbothered, at peace. And yet Palmyra's truest and greatest work of art was not a thing of stone. It was a thing that moved and vanished and came again, for the finest thing Palmyra made was the caravan itself, 1,000 camels gathered and marshalled and loaded and guarded by the city's own archers, set under the command of a caravan captain. A man chosen not for his blood, but for his judgment and steadiness and nerve. A kind of admiral of the dunes who would take his great slow fleet out across the ocean of sand and bring it safe home again. And when such a captain had done this year after year, the city honoured him the way a sea city honours a great admiral, by raising a statue of him high on a bracket on the side of one of the columns, so that over the years the main avenue became a long gallery of caravan men standing in stone up and down the colonnade, gazing quietly down at the traffic of the road they had spent their lives crossing, watching over it still. And the quietest treasure Palmyra left, and to my mind the most touching, is a single slab of stone, a tax law, the tariff of Palmyra, a stone taller than a man carved close all over in 2 languages side by side, and what it says in all that careful lettering is simply the list of the tolls. So much on a camel load of dried goods, so much on a wagon, so much on purple dyed wool, so much on olive oil, so much on salt, an entire living civilization's plain ordinary bookkeeping, cut painstakingly into stone and set up in the square for all to read. And I love it, because it is the proof, the receipt that tells us none of this was a dream or a legend, for legends do not pay tolls, and here in this stone is the flat, unpoetical truth that the camels were real and were counted, and were taxed, the whole shimmering romance of the road brought down to a clerk with a list and a scale, the dream so solid and ordinary that it had paperwork. And now the evening comes down over Palmyra, at peace, the great heat lifting off the stone and drifting away, and along the whole mile of the colonnaded street the lamps are lit, one after another. A servant with a taper going from bracket to bracket down the golden avenue, so that little by little the long straight street becomes a double string of small warm stars stretching away into the blue dusk. And up on the ridge the tower tombs with their calm carved faces catch the last of the sun and go slowly from gold to rose, and from rose to soft blue shadow. And the caravan captains standing in stone along the columns fade gently into the dark, their work done, their fleets long home. And we will leave Palmyra exactly here, in this golden ease, the lamps burning quietly the length of the street, the whole rich, improbable city at rest between its 2 worlds, with the well breathing softly at its heart. And we rest here with it a while, in no hurry at all, for there is a little of the road still left, and a little of the night still left, and both of them are downhill now. And in the last dark before the dawn, while the lamps still burn along the colonnade, the bells of our own patient caravan take up their low note once more, quietly, so as not to wake the sleeping city. And we rise, and the camels rise, and we move off softly out beneath the western arch onto the last stage of all, with the land beginning at last to fall away gently in front of us, sloping down and down toward the setting place of the sun. There is no climbing left to do. For 4,000 miles this road has hauled itself over the roof of the world and down again, across the singing sands and the black desert and the stony plateaus, and now, at the very end, it only descends, softly, giving itself up to the sea it has been walking toward all along. and the wells come closer together now, and the hard grey thorn of the dry lands gives way, first to a little grass in the hollows, then to true green groves along the track, olive and fig and pale dusty vineyards, the land growing kinder mile by mile, the way a hard day softens at last into evening. And the road aims itself first toward a great old city where the mountains step down to meet the sea, called Antioch, and there the worn brown thread of dust the caravan has followed since Chang'an gives way beneath the camels to stone to true paved road. Great fitted blocks of pale worn stone laid down straight and sure by Roman hands centuries before, and set beside it at every mile a low standing stone, a milestone, counting down the distance to the sea, so that now the caravan no longer wanders and searches its way, but simply follows the milestones, one and then the next, and then the next, the way you might count slow breaths in the dark, each one carrying you a little nearer to sleep. And it is somewhere along that milestoned road, in the cool of an afternoon, that the oldest driver in the whole company lifts his head from his dozing and draws a long slow breath through his nose, and holds it, and smiles, because on the wind there is a smell he has been waiting 4,000 miles to catch, a smell no one has met since Chang'an, cool and clean and vast and a little sharp, the smell of salt, the smell of the open sea. And up and down the line the long necks lift, and the tufted ears turn forward, every animal swivelling toward that faint salt wind, for even the camels know that the end of the road is near. And then comes the evening of the last rise. The sun is going down behind you, the light turning that deep honeyed gold that comes only at the very end of a day. And the lead camel, the tall patient beast that has walked at the head of the whole caravan for month upon month, comes up over the top of that last rise and stops. Just stops. No one has told it to, no one has pulled the rope. It simply crests the rise and halts and stands, as if even a camel knows when a thing deserves stopping for, and the whole caravan behind it slows and gathers and stops too, one animal at a time, strung out along the top of the ridge in the gold evening light, looking, because below them at last lies the water. Not a well, not an oasis pool, but water without any end to it. A great shining arm of the sea reaching up between the hills, the strait they call the Bosphorus, the narrow bright water where one whole continent leans in so close to another that they very nearly touch, where Asia, the vast east you have crossed all night, reaches out and almost sets its hand upon Europe, the two of them separated only by that one shining ribbon of moving water going dusky, silver in the last light. And across it, on the far shore, rising up out of its own trembling reflection on 7 gentle hills, stands the city the whole road has been murmuring about since the drum towers of Chang'an sounded the dawn 10 months and 4,000 miles ago. The city at the end of the world, the golden one, Constantinople. And it is lit, in the blue dusk, like a constellation brought down out of the sky and laid upon the hills. There are lamps in 10,000 windows climbing the dark hills in tiers, warm and small and countless, going up and up as if the stars themselves had come down to roost on the slopes. There are lamps out on the water at the mastheads of the anchored ships, and every one of them has a twin trembling upside down in the black water below, so that the harbour holds 2 skies of light, one hung above and one drowned and wavering beneath, and above all of it, higher and softer than all of it, there is one great pale patient shape of gold, an enormous rounded dome floating above the crown of the city and catching the very last of the light long after the streets have gone to shadow, glowing gently on and on in the dusk, and that is the church they call Holy Wisdom, Hagia Sophia, the greatest building of that whole world. So vast and so softly luminous, its dome so wide and lifted so high on its ring of windows, that the travellers who came to it wrote afterward that it did not seem to rest upon its walls at all, but to hang from heaven on a golden chain. Let the caravan stand there, and simply look, the way every company of tired men who ever came over that last rise stood still and looked and said nothing. Men who had crossed the singing sands and the roof of the world, and the whole turning breadth of the earth, standing in a row on a ridge at dusk, with the salt wind in their faces, only looking at the lamps and the water and the dome hanging in the gold. While the smell of the sea mixes now with wood smoke from 10,000 hearths, and, underneath it, faint and homely and unbearably kind after so long in the wilderness, the smell of bread baking somewhere in the city across the water. And then, gently, the light goes, and they make their last camp there on the ridge above the strait, in sight of the lamps, and the night comes down, and you may let it come down over you too, and watch the next morning arrive without ever quite waking for it. For in the soft grey of that next dawn the crossing is made in the most peaceful way imaginable, on flat broad ferry barges that carry the caravan over the strait a few camels at a time, the animals standing calm and swaying a little on the boards while the grey water slides beneath, and the gulls turn and cry overhead in the pale early air, until the whole company is gathered on the near shore in the country of the city itself. And what walls they are that meet you there, though this morning they mean you no harm at all, the great triple land walls, 3 lines of defence laid one behind the other, a wide dry moat, then a lower outer wall, then a great high inner wall taller than the rest, and set all along them, marching away over the hills into the mist, more than 90 square stone towers, the walls that stood across the neck of this land for 1,000 years and turned back army after army, and yet this morning they are doing nothing warlike at all, only standing in the early sun warming their old honey-coloured limestone, quiet and enormous and at peace, while in the cracks between their ancient stones the sparrows hop and squabble over nesting places, small and busy and utterly unafraid, as if the mightiest walls in the world were built for no grander purpose than to give a sparrow somewhere out of the wind. And the caravan passes in through the deep gate, a long dim tunnel of stone driven through the thickness of the walls, and inside it the camel bells, which have rung all the way from China across half the turning world, ring back off the close stone on either side, doubled and echoing in the dark of the gate, one last time, and then the tunnel ends, and the light opens, and just like that, after 4,000 miles of desert and mountain and sand and sky, the road becomes streets. Rest on that a while, and let it be enough. The road has become streets. The wilderness is behind you. You have arrived. Now the last small work is done, gently in the city's own quarter of the silk merchants, where the loads are slipped at last from the camels' backs and the knots untied. And here is a tender thing to notice as sleep comes closer, that the very knots being loosened now, here at the western end of the world, are the same knots first tied all those months ago by lantern light in a yard in Chang'an, tied tight under a Chinese moon and never once undone through all the deserts between, and now patient Byzantine fingers work them loose under a Roman one, and the wrapping falls open, and the silk pours out into the morning light, bolt after shining bolt, cool and rippling and impossibly smooth, and it is weighed and its weight written down in the ledgers of the city, so there it is. The whole journey come to its quiet accounting, a thread that began as a single fibre unwound from a cocoon on a mulberry leaf under a Chinese sun, ending its 4,000-mile journey as a number in a Roman ledger. And out in the courtyard the camels, unburdened at last, the terrible weight lifted off their backs for good, roll their long necks and stretch and groan their great contented groans, and one by one fold their legs beneath them and sink down onto the clean straw, and they care nothing at all that they have just walked across the entire known world. They only care that the load is off and the straw is soft and the day is warm. And they close their long-lashed eyes, and that is the most restful thing about them, that having done a wondrous thing they simply lie down and rest, wanting no praise for it, and you may do exactly the same, having come all this way, and want no praise for it either, and simply rest. And here, with the silk wade and the camels sleeping, the road gives us its most beautiful bookend, an answer at last to a secret we carried out of the East many hours ago, for you may remember the princess in the Jade River kingdom of Khotan, who carried the forbidden secret of the silkworm hidden in her hair across a guarded border. And now, at the very far end of the same road, that same slow, quiet miracle happens again. For all these centuries the West had bought silk and worn it and loved it, and never once known what it truly was, guessing it was a kind of wool that grew on the leaves of trees. And then, around 1500 years ago, in the reign of the great emperor whose masons raised that very dome, 2 old monks came quietly to the palace in this city. 2 elderly travellers who had lived long years in the Far East and told the emperor the truth, that silk is not a plant and not a wool, but a thread, a single fine thread spun out of its own body by a small pale caterpillar that eats nothing but mulberry leaves, and that if one only had the tiny eggs of that creature, one could make silk here, at the end of the world, and never buy it from strangers again. And the emperor sent them back, all that way back, 4,000 miles east along the whole road you have just travelled, 2 old men walking. And there they gathered, in secret, a small handful of the tiny eggs of the silk moth, no bigger than grains of dust, and hid them, the story says, sealed up inside the hollow of their bamboo walking staves, and turned around and walked the whole 4,000 miles home again, 2 old men leaning on 2 hollow canes, keeping the eggs warm the whole way with the warmth of their own bodies, so that the most valuable cargo in the entire history of the road weighed almost nothing at all and slept the whole way home inside 2 walking sticks. And they reached this city, and the eggs were still alive and they hatched, and mulberry trees were planted and looms were built, and silk began to be spun and woven here at the western end of the world within sight of that great golden dome, so that the secret arrived at the far end of the road in exactly the same quiet, hidden, patient way it had first left the near end. Carried in the hair of a princess, carried in the cane of a monk, and now the 2 ends of the long thread each held the same small secret, held it gently between them across the whole width of the world, like 2 hands holding the opposite ends of the same ribbon. Rest on that a while, the 2 hands and the 1 ribbon, and how softly the greatest secrets travel. And now, as the very tenderest part of this whole long night, let me tell you quietly how we know any of this is true, and it comes down, in the end, to a few pieces of paper that the dry desert chose to keep. For far out in the eastern sands, near the singing dunes and the still blue eye of Crescent Lake where we rested many hours ago, near a fallen watchtower on the edge of the desert, there was found, long after, a little leather mail-bag, a courier's pouch of letters that never arrived, dropped or abandoned there 1,700 years ago, and kept all that time in the dry dark, perfect, the ink still sharp. Letters written by Sogdian merchants to their partners and families far away, and one of them, folded and lost and kept 16 centuries, is a letter from a merchant fretting about his goods and his prices, and worrying, tenderly, achingly, about the people he loves who are very far from him, sending his worry and his love back home down a road he cannot see the end of, and that letter is signed, in the man's own careful hand, with a name, and the name is Nanai Vandak. Nanai Vandak, the very name of the master whose bells we followed out of Chang'an at the beginning of the night. And I will tell you something now, softly, before you sleep. I did not invent him. I borrowed him. There really was a man named Nanai Vandak, a real Sogdian merchant whose actual handwriting still exists, who really lived and traded along this road and really did love people who were very far from him, and really did sit down and worry about them and write it down, and his letter waited in the sand for 1,600 years, patient and unread, until it was found, so that he could come back tonight, just once more, and lead one more caravan across the whole world, for you. And his was not the only paper the desert kept. For you may remember, I asked you, hours ago, to hold on to one more sealed thing, and here it is, unsealed at last, out in those same eastern cliffs, in the great honeycomb of painted cave shrines. There was one small chamber that some careful hand had bricked up and plastered over and painted across around 1,000 years ago, hiding it completely, and it stayed hidden, forgotten, invisible, for 900 years, until one morning near the start of the last century, a quiet caretaker monk named Wang Yuanlu, sweeping the caves, noticed a thin crack in a painted wall where none should be, and behind it a hollow, and behind that a sealed door, and behind the door a small room packed floor to ceiling with paper, 50,000 manuscripts, tens of thousands of scrolls sealed up in the dark, letters and prayers and contracts and calendars and songs and account books, written in Chinese and Tibetan and Sogdian and Sanskrit, and in tongues no one alive can any longer read. The road's own paper, come home at last to testify to itself. And among all those scrolls was one, a long printed scroll of a holy text called the Diamond Sutra, and at its end it carries a date, more than 1100 years ago, which makes it the oldest dated printed book anywhere on the whole earth, printed with wooden blocks 6 centuries before Europe learned to print at all, and printed at its foot with a little dedication saying that it was made for free and universal distribution, to be given away to everyone, so that the oldest printed book we possess, the grandfather of every book that has ever been made, was never for sale, was made only to be given. And around these great witnesses stand all the small ones, humble and dusty and utterly convincing. The tariff stone of Palmyra with its ordinary taxes cut in stone, the little contracts for the hire of a camel, the receipts and the passports and the packing lists, and even, kept by the same kind sand, a young bride's list of the things in her trousseau, so that in the end this whole shining dream of a road is proved to us not by heroes and not by legends, but by paperwork, by receipts, by a merchant's worried love and a bride's list of linens, a dream proved true by its own quiet bookkeeping. And now, so softly you will hardly feel it happen, the age itself begins to turn, the way a sleeper turns over in the night without waking. For while the caravans had been walking their 4,000 patient miles, out on the southern ocean sailors had slowly been learning the secret of the great seasonal winds, the monsoons that blow steadily one way for half the year and steadily back the other. And a ship that trusts those winds can carry in its single wooden belly what 400 camels would need to carry on their backs. And it pays no toll at any mountain pass, and feeds no guards and fears no bandits in the dunes, and so gently, over long years, the great slow tide of the world's trade began to lean away from the land and down toward the water. And then, on a day about 570 years ago, the shining city at the end of the road changed hands. New banners were raised on the old 1,000-year towers. The city took a new name and a new master, and the long patterns of trade bent further still toward the open ocean, and far away in the east, on some ordinary evening, a last unhurried caravan came plodding in out of the sands to some oasis town and knelt its camels and slipped its loads and untied its knots exactly as 10,000 caravans had done before it. And no one standing in that dusty yard had the slightest idea that this was the last one, that a thing 4,000 miles wide and 15 centuries long was quietly ending in the ordinary loosening of an ordinary rope, and that is how it went, not with a fall and not with a fire, but with a rope untied at dusk and nobody noticing, no tragedy at all, just a very long day, a day 1,500 years long, easing at last down into its evening and its close, the way your own day is easing now. And here, at the very end, is the secret the whole night has been carrying softly toward you, which is this: the road never really ended at all. It did not vanish. It is lying, this very moment, all around you, in the dark of your own room. It is in the paper of the book resting closed on the table by your bed, paper first made in the courtyards of Samarkand and carried west a page at a time. It is in the clear glass of the window that holds the night out, glass the desert learned to blow and trade. It is in the peach ripening in the bowl in your kitchen, a fruit that first grew in China and walked west along this very road. It is in the tea folded dry in its box in the cupboard, and in the round belly and long neck of every guitar, which is only the old caravan lute, the oud, still sleeping quietly inside a newer shape, And it is even there in the soft small word itself, silk, so smooth and drowsy on the tongue, a word that travelled the whole way west and never lost its softness. You are lying, right now, at the far quiet end of the Silk Road, and so is every one of us, all of us, always, living at the end of the road without ever once having to leave home. And now it is time, gently, to put it all away for the night, the way the drivers put away the tack and the bells at the end of a long day's stage, and we will do it the way this road always did it, by saying good night to each thing in its turn. Good night to Chang'an and its great drum towers, and to the dawn drum that started us on our way. Good night to the singing dunes that hum in the wind, and to the still blue eye of Crescent Lake lying calm among the sand. Good night to the jade rivers of Khotan, where the smooth green stones wait in the cold clear water, and good night to the princess and her quiet secret carried in her hair. Good night to the stone tower in the high passes, where east and west met each other halfway and shook hands and traded and went home. Good night to the courtyards of Samarkand, to the melons and the paper mills and the tiled blue evening. Good night to Merv of the great ice houses standing like beehives against the sky, and to the underground rivers walking cool and unseen beneath the burning sand. Good night to Palmyra and her lamps lit one by one down the long mile of columns, and to her tariff stone, her accounts all settled and paid up in peace. Good night to the lamps of Constantinople climbing the 7 hills, and to the great dome hanging in the dusk from heaven on its golden chain. And good night, last of all, to Nanai Vandak, the careful master whose bells we followed the whole night through, whose worried, loving letter was lost in the sand and kept 1600 years and arrived, at last, perfectly and safely, its love delivered whole. Empires rose and set along this road, and cities flowered like lamps, and then went dark, and went back down into the sand, and the great road itself at last grew quiet and let the grass come over it. Kingdoms are like that, all of them. They come and they go. They are crossed and lost and won. But there is one kingdom that never falls, one country that no army ever took and no ocean ever emptied, and you are crossing its border now, softly, without any papers and without any toll, the one gentle kingdom of sleep, which has been waiting for you all night long with the patience of the desert, in no hurry at all, certain you would come. And far off, out beyond the edge of hearing, the last caravan of the night is moving away under the same old stars that are wheeling slowly over your own roof right now, and its bells are growing fainter, and slower, and softer, farther and farther off across the dark, until you truly cannot say any longer whether you are still hearing them out there in the night, or only remembering them from somewhere earlier in the evening. And it does not matter in the least which it is, so let them go on without you now. They know the way. They have always known the way. The dark around you is not an ending. It is only a resting, and morning is already out there, already saddled, already riding slowly toward you from the east the way it always does, in no hurry, touching first some far dune out in the desert, and then a river, and then the top of a distant wall, and then a rooftop, and then, in its own good and gentle time, and not one moment before it is ready, your window. And until it comes, there is nothing at all in all the 4,000 miles of the night that needs you awake for it. It is all taken care of. The camels are asleep on the straw, the silk is weighed and written down, the gates are shut, and the lamps are lit, and the walls are keeping their long quiet watch, and the letter after 1600 years has been delivered. Sleep now, the road will keep. Good night.